I still remember exactly how the candlelight flickered across James's face when his phone lit up on the table between us. We were celebrating 10 years of marriage at Alessandra's, the upscale Italian restaurant in downtown Boston, where he had proposed a decade earlier. I had spent hours getting ready, wearing the emerald dress he had always loved, my hair swept up the way he preferred it. The waiter had just poured our second glass of champagne Perrier-Jouet. My favorite, and James was midway through a story about his newest client when the notification appeared. It wasn't the gentle buzz that caught my attention. It was the way his expression changed, the slight widening of his eyes, the almost imperceptible tightening of his jaw, the way his hand moved just a fraction too quickly to turn the phone face down. But not before I caught a glimpse of the message preview. "When are you leaving her? I can't keep waiting." The rest was cut off, but those 7 words were enough to instantly rewrite our entire history together. "Sorry about that," James said smoothly, sliding the phone into his jacket pocket. "Work never stops. You know how it is." His smile returned, practiced and perfect, as if nothing had happened. As if my world hadn't just tilted on its axis. "Was that important?" I asked, proud of how steady my voice remained while my heart hammered against my ribs. "Nothing that can't wait until tomorrow," he replied, raising his glass. "To us, Rebecca. To 10 incredible years and many more to come." I touched my glass to his, the crystal making a hollow sound that seemed to echo the emptiness suddenly spreading through my chest. As I sipped the expensive champagne, I calculated how long I had suspected something was wrong. 3 months? 4? The late nights at the office, the business trips that seemed to multiply, the new cologne I didn't recognize, the sudden password on his phone. All the signs had been there, but I had refused to see them clearly until this moment. Even as I sat across from him, smiling and nodding as he resumed his story, my mind was racing ahead. Who was she? How long had it been going on? Was it someone I knew? "My name is Rebecca Morgan. I'm 38 years old, and until that night at Alessandra's, I thought I knew what my life was about. I had a successful career as an event director at Elevate Hotels, a marriage I believed in, and a beautiful townhouse in Beacon Hill that we'd spent years making perfect. I was the daughter of William Hayes, a self-made businessman who built Hayes Construction from nothing after my mother died when I was 12. He raised me alone, teaching me about independence, hard work, and loyalty. My father never quite warmed to James. "He's too polished, too practiced," Dad would say. "Men who charm everyone aren't trustworthy." I dismissed his concerns as overprotective, even when they caused tension between us. In my father's eyes, James's designer suits and country club memberships were red flags, not achievements. "Just promise me you'll protect yourself," he said before our wedding, recognizing he couldn't change my mind. "Keep your career, your independence. Don't lose yourself in becoming his wife." I promised, partly to appease him and partly because I believed my career was important too. After the wedding, I continued working, coordinating high-profile events and building a solid professional reputation. James, meanwhile, ascended rapidly through the ranks at Harrington and Blake, a prestigious law firm specializing in corporate mergers. We settled into what I thought was a comfortable life, joining the right social circles, hosting dinner parties for James's colleagues, and beginning to plan for a family. We agreed to wait until James made partner, a goal he pursued with single-minded intensity. The first hairline fractures in our marriage appeared so gradually I didn't recognize them for what they were. James began working later, missing dinners I'd carefully prepared. Weekend plans were increasingly canceled due to urgent client matters. When I'd express disappointment, he'd soothe me with expensive gifts and promises of future time together. "This is temporary," he'd assure me. "Once I make partner, everything will be different. We'll have the time and the money to do everything we've dreamed of." I believed him because I needed to, because the alternative was too painful to consider. When we celebrated his partnership 3 years into our marriage, I felt we'd reached a milestone that would usher in the next phase of our life together. Now we can start trying for a baby, I whispered in his ear as he held me close during the celebration dance. He tensed slightly, then relaxed with practiced ease. "Let's enjoy this moment first," he replied. "We have all the time in the world." But the partnership didn't deliver on its promises. Instead of more time together, James's schedule became even more demanding. Important client dinners, firm retreats, industry conferences. There was always some essential event that required his presence but not mine. When I suggested accompanying him on a trip to Chicago, his response was tellingly defensive. "These aren't vacations, Rebecca. I'm working 16-hour days. You'd be bored and alone in the hotel." The shift in our physical relationship was equally telling. Passionate nights became increasingly rare, replaced by quick kisses and excuses about stress and exhaustion. When we did connect intimately, I sometimes felt James was somewhere else entirely, going through motions that once came naturally. After 2 years of trying to conceive without success, we began fertility treatments. The process was physically and emotionally draining for me, but James seemed strangely detached. He missed appointments due to work conflicts, responded to emails during our consultations, and reacted to our repeated failures with a resignation that bordered on relief. "Maybe we're not meant to be parents," he suggested after our 3rd unsuccessful procedure. "We have a good life, just the 2 of us. Do we really need to put ourselves through more of this?" His words cut deeper than he knew. Did he truly believe we weren't meant to be parents, or just that he wasn't meant to be a parent with me? My father's health began declining around our 7th anniversary, a slow progressing heart condition that gradually sapped his formidable strength. James was surprisingly attentive during this period, joining me for hospital visits and handling logistics when my focus was solely on Dad's care. I interpreted this as evidence of his fundamental goodness, his ability to show up when it truly mattered. What I didn't know then was that my father was watching James carefully during those hospital visits, noticing things I was too preoccupied to see: the frequent phone checks, the hallway conversations, the convenient coffee runs whenever difficult medical discussions arose. 6 months before he died, during a rare moment alone while James was on one of his important calls, my father took my hand. "Rebecca, I need to talk to you about something important," he began, his voice weaker but his eyes as sharp as ever. "About James, and about your future." I shook my head, not wanting another critique of my husband. "Dad, not now, please." "Yes, now," he insisted with unexpected firmness. "I may not have another chance. I've made arrangements with my attorney, Peter Griffin. After I'm gone, I want you to go see him." The vagueness of his request confused me, but I promised just to ease his mind. When James returned minutes later, my father's expression shifted to careful neutrality, and the subject wasn't raised again. When my father passed away 3 months later, James was by my side, solid and supportive, through the funeral arrangements and the difficult weeks that followed. His firm granted him compassionate leave, and he used that time to help me organize my father's affairs and begin the grieving process. It was during this period that I found a sealed envelope in my father's desk drawer, addressed to me with privet written across the front. Inside was a key and a handwritten note: "For the safety deposit box at Boston First National. Only if necessary. Love, Dad." I showed it to James, who examined the key with mild curiosity. "Probably just some family heirlooms or documents," he suggested. "We can check it out once things settle down." But something in my father's emphasis only if necessary made me hesitate. I tucked the key into my jewelry box instead, an action that would prove pivotal in the months to come. The 1st anniversary of my father's death arrived on a Tuesday in late October. I took the day off work, telling James I needed some time alone. He kissed me distractedly on his way out the door, already on his phone with a client. I drove to Mount Auburn Cemetery, where my father was buried beside my mother. The maple trees blazed with autumn colors, their golden leaves carpeting the ground. I sat on the bench, across from their headstones, wrapped in my father's old cardigan that still held a trace of his scent. For a long while, I sat in silence, watching the light shift through the trees. No words, no prayers, just the quiet communion of grief and memory. In that stillness, something crystallized within me, awareness that had been building since finding the key. My father had been trying to tell me something important, something about James, something about protection, and I had refused to listen. I reached into my pocket and touched the key I'd brought with me, running my fingers over its teeth. What was so important that my father had locked it away? What was he trying to protect me from, even after he was gone? The leaves rustled overhead, and in that moment, I felt my father's presence so strongly it took my breath away. The gentle persistence of his love, reaching beyond death to guide me. "I'm listening now, Dad," I whispered to the autumn air. "I'm ready to see." As life resumed its normal pace after my father's death, I threw myself into my career with renewed focus. The grief and failed fertility treatments had left me craving professional accomplishment, something tangible I could control and achieve. When an executive position opened up at Elevate Hotel's Director of Special Projects, reporting directly to the CEO, I applied, despite knowing it would require longer hours and occasional travel. James's reaction to my career ambitions was unexpectedly negative. "Is this really the right time for such a demanding role?" he questioned when I told him about the interviews. "We're still trying to start a family, and you're still processing your father's death." His concern seemed genuine, but something in his tone felt awfully worried about my well-being and more concerned about the potential disruption to our carefully structured lives. Lives that I was beginning to realize were structured primarily around his needs and schedule. Despite his reservations, I pursued and ultimately secured the position. The promotion came with a substantial salary increase, putting my earnings nearly on par with James' fact that seemed to unsettle him in ways I couldn't quite articulate. 3 weeks into my new role, I returned home early from a business dinner to find our house empty and dark. James had texted earlier that he'd be working late, a common occurrence. What was uncommon was the unfamiliar perfume lingering in our bedroom, and a long blonde hair on his pillow. I am brunette. I have been my entire life. Standing in our bedroom, holding that single blonde hair between my fingers, I felt something shift inside Meth, first crack in the foundation of trust I'd built my marriage upon. That night, I didn't confront James. Instead, I began paying closer attention, noting patterns I'd previously dismissed. The new password on his phone, the credit card statements he now received electronically instead of by mail, the networking events that never seemed to have digital invitations or follow-up emails. The woman with the blonde hair remained a mystery, but her presence in my marriage became increasingly difficult to ignore. By the time our 10th anniversary approached, I was living in a state of painful awareness, gathering evidence while maintaining a facade of normalcy, which brings us back to that text message at Alessandra's, the 7 words that confirmed everything I had suspected but couldn't prove. "When are you leaving her? I can't keep waiting." The morning after our anniversary dinner, I awoke before James. He was sleeping soundly beside me, one arm flung above his head like a child, vulnerable in a way he never appeared while awake. For a moment, watching the gentle rise and fall of his chest, I almost convinced myself that I had imagined everything, the text, the blonde hair, the subtle distancing that had characterized our marriage for months. But the weight in my chest told a different story. Reality doesn't disappear with daylight. It only becomes clearer. I slipped out of bed without waking him and padded to the kitchen to make coffee. Our anniversary gifts sat on the dining room table, the vintage watch I had given him, still in its box, and the diamond earrings he had presented to me with a flourish and a kiss, expensive, tasteful, impersonal. I wondered if she had helped him choose them, or if he maintained a mental catalogue of appropriate gifts for a wife versus a mistress. As the coffee brewed, I checked the time. 7:15 a.m. James wouldn't wake for another 45 minutes. He was meticulous about his morning routine. 8 a.m. alarm, 8:15 shower, 8:45 breakfast, 9:30 departure for the office. This predictability, once comforting, now provided me with the opportunity I needed. I carried my coffee to our home office and quietly closed the door. James's laptop sat on the desk, closed but not locked. He always entered his password first thing in the morning to check emails before heading to the firm. I hesitated only briefly before opening it and navigating to his Google account settings. The recent devices list confirmed what I already suspected: activity from an iPhone and MacBook that weren't mine or his work computer. Someone else was logged into his accounts. I didn't need to see more. I closed the laptop exactly as I'd found it, my suspicions further validated. Back in the kitchen, I began preparing James's favorite breakfast: avocado toast with poached eggs and crispy prosciutto. The domesticity of the act struck me as absurd given the circumstances, but maintaining normalcy was crucial for what I planned to do next. James appeared in the kitchen doorway at precisely 8:47, freshly showered and immaculately dressed in one of his bespoke suits, his hair still damp. He smiled when he saw the breakfast spread. "You didn't have to do all this," he said, coming up behind me to kiss my cheek. "Last night was supposed to be about pampering you." I turned, offering my most convincing smile. "I wanted to. Besides, I'm heading into the office early today. That London conference call I told you about." This was no conference call, but James's slight nod confirmed he wasn't paying close enough attention to my schedule to catch the fabrication. "Right. The London thing," he said, pouring himself coffee. "What time will you be home tonight?" "Probably late," I replied, watching his reaction carefully. "The Tokyo team wants to connect after London, so I'll likely have dinner at the office." A flicker of something relief crossed his face before he masked it with an appropriate show of disappointment. "That's too bad. I was hoping we could continue our celebration tonight." He checked his watch, the Rolex he wore daily, not the vintage piece I'd given him. "Actually, I might have to work late too. The Peterson merger is heating up." "How convenient." The Peterson merger had been heating up for months, providing perfect cover for late nights and weekend emergency meetings. I wondered briefly if the blonde woman worked at his firm, or if their connection was through a client. "We'll celebrate another night," I said lightly, gathering my purse and keys. "I should get going. That report won't review itself." James caught my arm as I moved past him, pulling me into an embrace that felt rehearsed, a performance of husbandly affection. "I had a wonderful time last night," he murmured against my hair. "You looked beautiful." The compliment, once treasured, now felt hollow. Had he texted her the same words after our anniversary dinner? Was their relationship built on the same practiced charm he had once used to win me? "I'm glad," I replied, extracting myself from his arms. "See you tonight, or tomorrow, depending on how late we both work." As I drove away from our home, the morning sun cast long shadows across the streets of Beacon Hill. I passed the small park, where James and I used to have Sunday picnics in our early years together, the boutique where he bought me my first anniversary gift, the cafe where we'd lingered over weekend brunches planning our future. A future that had somehow become this hollow present. I pulled over at a small lookout point, overlooking the Charles River, needing a moment to breathe before proceeding with my plan. The water sparkled in the morning light, boats cutting white trails across its surface. Joggers and cyclists moved along the riverside paths, their ordinary morning routines continuing while my world was silently imploding. I rested my forehead against the steering wheel, allowing myself this one private moment of vulnerability before the mask of competence would need to return. No tears came. I was beyond tears. In that strange, numb space where shock meets determination. In the quiet of my car, with the city waking around me, I made a promise to myself. Whatever happened next, I would not let James Morgan define my worth or determine my future. The woman who had diminished herself to fit his expectations, who had ignored warning signs in pursuit of an idealized future, that woman was done. In her place stood someone who needed answers. Someone who would no longer accept charm as a substitute for truth. I started the car again, this time with a destination clearly in mind. Boston First National Bank. Instead of heading downtown to my office, I called my assistant Riley and arranged to work remotely, citing a personal matter that needed attention. My perfect attendance record and recent promotion had earned me considerable flexibility. The morning traffic moved sluggishly, giving me ample time to consider what might be waiting in that safety deposit box. Money? Legal documents? Or something else entirely? The bank manager, an older woman named Patricia with silver-rimmed glasses and a formal demeanor, verified my identification and led me to the vault area. "Your father accessed this box regularly for years," she commented as we walked. "He was always very particular about maintaining it properly." This information surprised me. I had assumed the safety deposit box was a recent arrangement, something established during his illness. The idea that my father had been planning, preparing for years, sent an uncomfortable chill through me. Patricia left me alone in a small private room, with the metal box retrieved from the vault. With trembling fingers, I inserted the key and lifted the lid. Inside, neatly organized, I found several labeled folders, a USB drive, and a sealed envelope with my name handwritten across the front. I opened the envelope first, recognizing my father's distinctive handwriting. "Natalie, if you're reading this, I can only assume my suspicions about James have proven correct. I'm sorry for that. Genuinely sorry. No father wants to see his daughter's heart broken. I've watched him for years, noticed the patterns you were too close to see. The way his eyes follow other women when you're not looking, the convenient timing of his work emergencies, the small inconsistencies in his stories that he covers with charm and deflection. Men like James are practiced deceivers. They don't change, they just become more careful. I couldn't stop you from marrying him. I tried. Perhaps not in the right ways, but I could prepare for the day when his true nature revealed itself. That's what this box contains. Protection for your future. Insurance against the damage he will inevitably cause. The red folder contains legal documents establishing the Rebecca Hayes Trust, currently valued at approximately $2.8 million. This trust was created 7 years ago with the proceeds from the sale of my company's Eastern Division money I never told you about because I wanted it secured for exactly this purpose. The trust has specific activation conditions. It remains dormant until and unless your marriage ends due to James's infidelity. My attorney, Peter Griffin, has detailed instructions and all necessary documentation. The blue folder contains his contact information and copies of the key provisions. The USB drive contains digital evidence I've gathered over the years. Nothing illegal, just careful observation and documentation of patterns. Credit card receipts, timestamps. Photographs taken at public events. Small things individually, but revealing when viewed collectively. I know this is painful. I know you loved, perhaps still love James. But love shouldn't require blindness. It shouldn't demand that you ignore your own value. You are my daughter, Rebecca. You are stronger than you know, smarter than you give yourself credit for, and worth far more than the value James places on you. With love and faith in your strength, Dad." Tears blurred my vision as I finished reading. Not tears of sadness, but of a complex mixture of grief, vindication, and a strange sense of comfort knowing my father had seen the truth long before I was ready to acknowledge it. The opposite of love isn't hate, my father used to say. It's clarity. And clarity was exactly what he'd given me. I opened the red folder with unsteady hands, scanning the legal documents within. The trust was indeed substantial. $2.8 million plus. Accumulated interest. Invested conservatively in blue-chip stocks and municipal bonds. More than enough to restart my life completely, if necessary. But the most surprising document wasn't financial at all. It was a detailed record of James's connection to Harrington and Blake's most significant client, Westridge Capital. My father had somehow discovered that Westridge's portfolio included several luxury hotels that were now under the management of Elevate, the very company I had recently been promoted within. The implication was clear. James's firm and my company were now professionally entangled through Westridge Capital. If this relationship became complicated by a messy divorce, particularly one involving infidelity by a partner at Harrington and Blake, the repercussions could be significant for both James's professional standing and the firm's relationship with their premier client. My father, even in death, had created leverage I never could have engineered myself. The blue folder contained Peter Griffin's business card, along with a handwritten note from my father. "Peter knows everything. He's expecting your call if this day ever comes." Finally, I inserted the USB drive into my phone using an adapter from my purse. The files were meticulously organized by date, going back almost to the beginning of my relationship with James. Asterisk photos, taken at charity events, showing James's hand lingering too long on a colleague's waist while I chatted with guests across the room. Asterisk credit card statements showing charges at hotels in cities where he claimed to be at conferences, but on dates that didn't match the conference schedules. Asterisk email headers from a private account I didn't recognize. My father had been thorough, methodical, and discreet. He hadn't intervened directly or confronted James that would have only pushed me further into defending my husband. Instead, he had quietly built a case, prepared resources, and waited for the day when I would need them. I sat in that small room for over an hour, absorbing everything. By the time I carefully repacked the box and returned it to the vault, asking Patricia to maintain its security, my shock had transformed into something more purposeful, not rage, not even heartbreak anymore, but a clear-eyed determination. As I drove away from the bank, I made two decisions. I would call Peter Griffin, and I would not confront James. Not yet. The tactical advantage my father had provided was too valuable to squander in an emotional confrontation that would only give James time to prepare his defenses. Instead, I would observe, document, and plan just as my father had done. I would maintain the facade of our perfect marriage while quietly placing the pieces that would ensure my protection when everything finally came to light. What I didn't anticipate was how quickly those pieces would need to be moved, or that the catalyst would come not from James, but from the blonde woman who was apparently growing impatient with his timeline for leaving me. 2 days after discovering my father's safety deposit box, I sat across from Peter Griffin in his downtown office space that emanated old-world professionalism with its leather chairs and walls lined with law books. At 60-something, with salt and pepper hair and shrewd eyes behind rimless glasses, Peter had been my father's attorney and friend for over 30 years. "Harold prepared extensively for this possibility," Peter said, reviewing the documents I'd brought from the safety deposit box, "though he hoped you'd never need to use these provisions." "I still can't believe he went to such lengths," I replied, feeling both grateful and unsettled by my father's foresight, creating a trust contingent on James's infidelity, gathering evidence for years. Peter's expression softened. Your father was a thorough man in everything he did. When he recognized potential harm to someone he loved, he didn't just worry, he created safeguards. He placed the documents in a folder and leaned forward. The question now is, what do you want to do with these safeguards, Rebecca? It was the question I'd been grappling with since leaving the bank. What did I want? Revenge? Security? Freedom? All of the above? I need time to think strategically, I finally answered. James doesn't know about any of this, and I'd like to keep it that way until I decide how to proceed. Peter nodded approvingly. A wise approach. The trust activation requires legal confirmation of infidelity, which means either James's admission or substantial evidence that would satisfy a court. We have good preliminary documentation thanks to your father, but we should gather more recent evidence. What would you recommend? I would suggest hiring a licensed private investigator. Peter slid a business card across his desk. Calvin Reed is discreet, thorough, and specializes in matrimonial investigations. Your father actually retained his services several times over the years to compile some of this evidence. The revelation that my father had gone so far as to hire a private investigator sent another shock through me. Had he been right to be so distrustful? The evidence suggested yes, but it still felt surreal, like I was living someone else's life, following a script written years before. There's another matter to discuss, Peter continued. The hotel management contract between Elevate and Westridge Capital. Your father identified this connection as potentially significant leverage. I'm aware of the relationship, I said cautiously. My recent promotion puts me in closer contact with the Westridge portfolio, but I'm not directly involved in their account management. That may be sufficient, Peter mused. The mere fact that scandal involving a Harrington and Blake partner could complicate their relationship with a major client creates pressure that could be advantageous during settlement negotiations. By the time I left Peter's office, we had developed a preliminary strategy. Gather definitive evidence of James's infidelity, prepare divorce filings but not submit them, and continue normal life while I considered my options. The trust would remain dormant until formally activated, but Peter assured me that all systems were in place for immediate action when needed. That night, I stood alone in our master bathroom, staring at my reflection in the mirror while James slept in the next room. I hardly recognized the woman. Looking back at me, her eyes held a knowledge that had aged her overnight. A weight of secrets and strategies that the Rebecca of a week ago couldn't have imagined carrying. I thought about the years I'd spent trying to be the perfect wife, arranging my schedule around James's, suppressing my ambitions to accommodate his, ignoring the little inconsistencies that now formed a clear pattern of deception. In the muted bathroom light, I took off my makeup, removed the earrings James had given me for our anniversary, and unpinned my hair. Layer by layer, I stripped away the carefully constructed image of Mrs. James Morgan, until only Rebecca Hayes remained my father's daughter, stronger than I had allowed myself to be for years. I touched my bare face, tracing the lines that had begun to appear around my eyes and mouth, not signs of age to be feared, but evidence of a life lived, experience gained, wisdom earned. The woman in the mirror wasn't diminished by James's betrayal. She was clarified by it, distilled to her essential self. You won't break me, I whispered to my reflection, making a promise to myself. This isn't the end of my story. It's the beginning. For the next week, I performed the role of devoted wife with Oscar-worthy precision. I prepared James's favorite meals, listened attentively to his stories about work, and maintained our regular routines. If he noticed any change in my behavior, he gave no indication. Meanwhile, Calvin Reed was methodically documenting James's activities. Our first meeting had been brief but productive. I provided him with James's schedule, habits, and the scraps of information I had about the blonde woman. Calvin was professional and matter-of-fact, treating the situation with neither judgment nor unnecessary sympathy. These cases follow patterns, he explained. Once we identify the rendezvous locations and communication methods, documenting the affair becomes straightforward. Calvin's initial report came faster than expected. Just 5 days after our meeting, he sent an encrypted email with a subject line we had agreed upon: Conference schedule update. Inside was a simple message: preliminary findings ready for review, available to meet at your convenience. I arranged to meet him during my lunch break at a quiet cafe, several blocks from both my office and James's firm. Calvin arrived, carrying a nondescript laptop bag, his appearance so conventional he was almost invisible among the business lunch crowd. Your husband has established a regular pattern, he began after we ordered coffee. He meets the woman identified as Olivia Winter-Severy Tuesday and Thursday at the Archer Hotel. They typically arrive separately between 12:30 and 1 p.m. and depart by 2:30 p.m. The Archer was an upscale boutique hotel downtown, less than a mile from Harrington and Blake, convenient for lunchtime rendezvous. Miss Winters is an associate attorney at Caldwell and Price, Calvin continued, showing me a professional headshot from the firm's website. They appear to have met approximately 8 months ago during depositions for the Suntech merger case. 8 months. While I was still grieving my father and undergoing fertility treatments, James had been starting an affair. I've documented 4 meetings in the past week and a half, Calvin said, opening his laptop to show me time-stamped photographs. The evidence is conclusive. The images were undeniable. James and a blonde woman, Olivia entering and leaving the hotel separately, but within minutes of each other. One especially clear photograph showed them kissing in the hotel bar before heading to the elevators. I stared at the pictures, feeling strangely detached. The woman was beautiful, in a polished, deliberate, way expensively highlighted blonde hair, designer clothing, the same sophisticated style that James had always appreciated. She looked younger than me, perhaps early 30s to my 38. But it wasn't just youth that distinguished her. She projected an eagerness, an ambition that reminded me of myself when I'd first met James. There's something else you should know, Calvin said, hesitating for the first time. Based on multiple conversations I've overheard and surveillance of their text communications when possible, Miss Winters appears to be under the impression that Mr. Morgan intends to leave his marriage soon. She's been increasingly insistent about establishing a timeline. The text from our anniversary dinner suddenly made perfect sense. When are you leaving her? I can't keep waiting. For what? For him to find the right moment? For him to secure his partnership further? For him to ensure I wouldn't cause problems for his career? I see, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. And has James given her a timeline? Calvin looked uncomfortable. He's been evasive in his responses, reassuring but non-committal. My professional assessment is that he's stalling. Stalling. The word hung between us, laden with implications. Was James genuinely conflicted about leaving our marriage? Was he calculating the financial implications? Or was he simply enjoying the benefits of both relationships for as long as possible? There's one more thing, Calvin added, sliding a small digital recorder across the table. This was captured yesterday at the Archer. I believe you should hear it. I positioned the recorder discreetly beside my coffee cup and pressed play. The audio quality was surprisingly good, though ambient noise from the hotel bar created a consistent background murmur. You promised, James. Olivia's voice was clear, tense with frustration. After your partnership was secure, after the firm's review period. That was 3 months ago. It's complicated, Liv, James's voice, so familiar yet strange in this context. Rebecca's been through a lot with her father's death, and now this promotion. It's a delicate situation. Delicate? Her tone sharpened. What's delicate is making me wait in the shadows while you play house with your wife. I'm not asking for dramatic gestures, just honesty. Tell her it's over." "The timing isn't right." James's voice lowered, becoming harder to hear. "The Westridge Capital deal is crucial for the firm. Rebecca's company just took over management of 3 of their hotel properties. If this goes badly, it could affect millions in legal fees." My breath caught. So that was it, not emotional conflict or even fear of financial settlement, but professional consequences. James was protecting his standing at the firm, ensuring the Westridge relationship remained untainted by personal scandal. "I don't care about Westridge Capital," Olivia hissed. "I care about wasting my 30s waiting for you to find the perfect moment." "There is no perfect moment, James. There's just now and later, and I'm tired of later." The recording continued with James offering more placating words, promises of soon and just a little longer, until they apparently moved away from the microphone's range. Calvin switched off the recorder. "I believe this provides clear motivation for Mr. Morgan's hesitation," he said. "The professional entanglement between his firm's client and your company creates potential complications he's trying to avoid." I sat back, absorbing this final confirmation. The leverage my father had identified was real enough that James was delaying his plans with Olivia to protect his professional interests. "What happens now?" Calvin asked after giving me a moment to process. What happened next was entirely unexpected. That evening, I arrived home before James, my mind still racing with everything I'd learned. I changed from my work clothes into casual wear and opened a bottle of wine, pouring a single glass that I took out to our small garden patio. The early autumn evening was warm, the sunset painting the sky in dramatic strokes of orange and pink. My phone buzzed with a text from James. "Working late, don't wait up." Of course he was. I wondered if he was actually working or with Olivia, perhaps trying to pacify her after yesterday's tense conversation. I didn't respond, simply set my phone on the patio table and tried to quiet my racing thoughts. Around 9:30 p.m., the unexpected happened. My doorbell rang. Curious and slightly wary, I made my way to the front door and checked the security camera on our doorbell system. A woman stood on my porch, blonde, stylish, visibly agitated. Olivia Winters. My heart hammered against my ribs as I considered my options. I could ignore her, pretend I wasn't home. I could call James and alert him that his mistress had arrived at our door. Or I could face her directly. Before I could decide, she rang the bell again, then began knocking with increasing urgency. With a deep breath, I opened the door. Up close, she was even more striking than in the photograph's flawless makeup, expensive perfume, the kind of confident beauty that turns heads. Her expression cycled rapidly from surprise to confusion, to something harder when she realized who I was. "You must be Rebecca," she said, her voice matching the one I'd heard on Calvin's recording. "I know who you are," I replied, keeping my voice neutral despite the adrenaline flooding my system. "James isn't here." "Good," she said, shifting the designer handbag on her shoulder, a nervous gesture at odds with her polished appearance. "I came to talk to you, not him." Every instinct screamed that this was dangerous territory, that inviting my husband's mistress into my home could only lead to more pain. But another part of me, perhaps my father's daughter after all, recognized this as a potential advantage, an unexpected source of information. I stepped aside, allowing her to enter. Olivia moved into my living room with the tentative steps of someone entering enemy territory, her eyes taking in the photographs on the mantel, James and me in happier times, my father and me at my college graduation, the professionally taken portrait from our wedding day. "I shouldn't be here," she said suddenly, though she made no move to leave. "This is inappropriate." "I think we passed inappropriate some time ago, don't you?" I gestured to the sofa. "Please, sit. Would you like some wine?" I was just having a glass myself. The absurd civility of the moment struck me as almost comical. Here I was, offering hospitality to the woman sleeping with my husband. Olivia perched on the edge of the sofa, declining the wine with a slight shake of her head. I came because I think you deserve to know the truth. James has been lying to both of us. That much I've gathered, I said, taking a seat opposite her. What specifically brings you to my doorstep tonight? She clasped her hands tightly in her lap, manicured nails digging into her skin. Yesterday, James told me he needs more time before ending your marriage. He said it's because of your recent promotion and some connection to Westridge Capital. I nodded, encouraging her to continue. But this morning, I discovered something. Olivia reached into her handbag and withdrew an envelope. I was at his apartment. His apartment? I interrupted, genuinely confused. James and I owned our townhouse together. We had no other properties. Olivia's expression shifted from determination to surprise. The loft downtown, on Riverside. He's had it for over a year. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. James had a separate apartment I knew nothing about, maintained for what purpose? The affair, obviously, but the time frame suggested he'd secured it well before meeting Olivia. I see, I said, fighting to maintain my composure. Please continue. I was looking for a phone charger in his desk drawer and found this. She handed me the envelope. It's a life insurance policy on you. My hands trembled slightly as I opened the envelope. Inside was indeed a life insurance policy taken out 18 months ago, listing me as the insured and James as the sole beneficiary. The death benefit was $5 million. At first, I thought it was just normal financial planning, Olivia continued, her voice tightening. But then I saw this. She leaned forward, pointing to a specific clause in the policy. It's a double indemnity rider. If you die in an accident, it pays $10 million. The room seemed to tilt slightly as the implications sank in. A secret apartment, a substantial life insurance policy I'd never consented to or signed, using what appeared to be my forged signature. A mistress who was growing increasingly impatient. When I confronted him, James said it was just smart financial planning, in case something happened to you. He said all wealthy couples have insurance on each other. Olivia's voice was strained. But the way he dismissed my concerns, the way he became angry when I kept questioning him, something felt very wrong. Why are you telling me this? I asked, genuinely curious about her motives. You want him to leave me. This doesn't accomplish that. Olivia looked directly at me, her composed veneer cracking to reveal genuine fear. Because I realized today that I don't know who James really is. And because if anything happened to you, I'd be the obvious suspect or accomplice. She swallowed hard. I'm ambitious. And yes, I've made terrible choices getting involved with a married man. But I'm not. I would never be part of... She couldn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. The unspoken suggestion hung in the air between us. James might have been considering a permanent, tragic solution to his Olivia or Rebecca dilemma solution that would leave him financially set with $10 million and free to console himself in Olivia's arms, provided she remained ignorant of his potential plans. I don't know if he would actually... Olivia trailed off again. Maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe it is just financial planning. But the timing, the secret apartment, the way he's been acting lately erratic, checking your schedule constantly, asking about your travel plans for work. My mind flashed to James's unusual interest in my upcoming business trip to Chicago, repeated confirmations of my departure date and flight details. He kept saying how much simpler everything would be if certain obstacles weren't in the way, Olivia continued. I thought he meant legal complications or financial entanglements. But what if I was the obstacle? I finished softly. We sat in silence for a long moment, two women, connected by the same man, confronting a possibility too disturbing to fully articulate. The irony wasn't lost on me, that Olivia had potentially saved me from a fate James might have been contemplating, all because she discovered something that threatened her as well. "Does James know you found this?" I finally asked, holding up the policy number. I put it back, exactly as I found it. "I told him I had a client emergency and left." Olivia glanced nervously at the door. "He thinks I'm at my apartment now." Another thought struck me. "Does James have a key to your apartment?" Olivia nodded slowly, the color draining from her face as she followed my train of thought. "You think I'm in danger too?" "I think caution is warranted," I replied carefully. "Do you have somewhere else you can stay tonight? A friend James doesn't know about, perhaps?" "My sister's in Brookline." "He's never met her." "Good. Go there. Don't tell James where you are." I stood, decision crystallizing with remarkable clarity. "And Olivia, thank you for coming here. Whatever your motives, I appreciate knowing the truth." She rose as well, relief evident in her expression, relief at unburdening herself, at having someone else validate her concerns, at the prospect of escape from a situation that had grown far darker than a typical affair. "What will you do?" she asked, pausing at the door. I thought of my father's safety deposit box, of Peter Griffin waiting for my call, of the trust that would activate once James's infidelity was legally established. "I'll protect myself," I answered simply. "I suggest you do the same." After Olivia left, I methodically moved through our home, gathering essential documents, cherished photographs, irreplaceable mementos from my father. I packed a small suitcase with enough clothing for several days, then made 2 phone calls, one to a hotel across town to book a room under my maiden name, and one to Peter Griffin's emergency line. Peter answered on the second ring, his voice alert despite the late hour. "Rebecca, what's happened?" "The situation has escalated beyond infidelity," I explained, keeping my voice low despite being alone in the house. "I need to activate the trust immediately. And Peter, I need additional legal help. I believe James may have taken out a fraudulent insurance policy on my life." The sharp intake of breath told me Peter understood the gravity of what I was suggesting. "Where are you now?" "Still at home, but I'm leaving within the hour. I've booked a room at the Winthrop Hotel under Hayes. I'll be there by 11. "I'll meet you there. Don't tell anyone else where you're going." "And Rebecca," his voice tightened with urgency, "take only your own vehicle. Don't use rideshare services or taxis that could be traced." After ending the call, I made one final stop in our home office. With the new information about the insurance policy in mind, I examined James's desk more carefully than ever before. In the back of the bottom drawer, concealed beneath hanging files, I discovered a false bottom. Inside was a small safe box secured with a combination lock. I tried James's birthday, no success. Our anniversary date, nothing. Then, on a hunch, I tried the date he'd made partner at the firm. The lock clicked open. Inside was a second phone I'd never seen before, several flash drives, and a manila folder containing copies of my medical records, from fertility treatments, highlighted passages on hormone medications and their side effects, and printouts of news articles about seemingly accidental deaths of spouses. One headline was circled in red ink: "Grieving husband receives $8 million after wife's fatal fall ruled accidental." A chill ran through me, unlike anything I'd ever experienced. Not fear, exactly, but a terrible clarity. The man I had loved, had tried to build a family with, had been methodically researching ways that I might die without arousing suspicion. How had I missed this darkness in him? Had it always been there, carefully concealed behind charm and ambition? Or had it developed gradually, his moral compass eroding as his priorities shifted? Taking photos of everything with my phone, I carefully replaced the items exactly as I'd found them, closed the safe box, and returned it to its hiding place. This evidence, combined with Olivia's testimony about the insurance policy, would be crucial in the days to come. As I prepared to leave the house, possibly for the last time, my phone buzzed with a text from James. "Wrapping up soon. Should be home by midnight. Don't wait up." I didn't reply. By midnight, I would be checking into the Winthrop under my maiden name, meeting with Peter Griffin, and setting in motion the legal mechanisms my father had so presciently established years ago. I took one final look around the living room at the carefully selected furniture, the tasteful artwork, the photographs documenting a marriage that had been unraveling long before I recognized the signs. Then I picked up my suitcase, walked out the door, and quietly closed it behind me. As I drove through the darkened streets toward temporary safety, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed in just 10 days from the anniversary dinner, where I'd glimpsed that fateful text message, to this moment of flight from the man who might have been planning my demise. My father had prepared for James's infidelity, creating financial protection I'd never expected to need. But even he couldn't have anticipated how sinister the situation would become, how the stakes would escalate from heartbreak to potential life and death. The rain began to fall as I neared the hotel. Droplets illuminated in my headlights like tiny shooting stars, appropriate weather for the storm that was about to break over my marriage, James's career, and the carefully constructed life we'd built on a foundation of lies. I pulled into the hotel parking garage at 10:47 p.m., choosing a spot near the elevator but partially concealed by a concrete pillar. As I gathered my belongings, my phone lit up with another text from James. "Where are you? Your car isn't in the garage." So he had come home early, perhaps eager to check that I was safely where he expected me to be. I turned off my phone without responding. Any communication now would only complicate an already dangerous situation. Peter was waiting in the hotel lobby as promised, looking grave but composed. Beside him stood a woman he introduced as Shannon Torres, a criminal defense attorney he had brought in, given the potential insurance fraud implications. "We've secured a conference room," Peter explained, leading me through the quiet lobby. "It's more secure than your room for this discussion." In that hotel conference room, under the harsh fluorescent lighting that made everything seem surreal, I laid out the entire situation. The affair, Olivia's unexpected visit, the insurance policy, and the disturbing contents of James's hidden safe box. Shannon took detailed notes, her expression growing increasingly troubled. "This goes well beyond divorce proceedings," she said, finally. "We're looking at potential insurance fraud, forgery, and possibly conspiracy to commit murder, though that would be much harder to prove without explicit evidence of intent. The primary concern right now is your safety," Peter added. "We need to file for an emergency protective order immediately." "But that would alert James that I know everything," I pointed out. "If he really was planning something, wouldn't that make him more dangerous, more desperate?" Shannon and Peter exchanged concerned glances. "That's a valid concern," Shannon acknowledged, "but we can't leave you unprotected either. I suggest we move on multiple fronts simultaneously. Secure the protective order, formally activate the trust, and contact law enforcement about the insurance fraud." "There's something else to consider," Peter said carefully. "The trust activation is specifically triggered by infidelity, which we can now definitively prove. Once activated, it not only provides you with financial independence, but also initiates certain protective measures your father put in place." "What kind of protective measures?" I asked, not recalling anything beyond the financial aspects in the documents I'd reviewed. "Harold arranged for immediate notification of several key parties in the event of activation," Peter explained. The managing partners at Harrington and Blake would receive documentation of James's affair with another attorney, specifically highlighting the potential ethics violations and conflicts of interest. Similarly, executives at Westridge Capital would be informed of possible compromises to their legal representation. My father's foresight was once again astounding. He had created not just financial protection but professional consequences that would immediately undermine James's position of power. "There's no going back once we initiate these measures," Peter warned. "Your marriage will effectively be over, and James's career will likely suffer significant damage." Given what we now know about the insurance policy and his possible intentions, I believe these steps are warranted. But the decision must be yours, Rebecca. The weight of the choice before me was momentous. Despite everything I'd discovered, some small part of me still struggled to reconcile the James I had loved with the man who might have been plotting my death. But as I looked at the evidence spread across the conference table, the insurance policy, the photographs of James with Olivia, the pictures I'd taken of his hidden research, the path forward became clear. "Activate everything," I said firmly. "The trust, the notifications, all of it, and let's file police reports about the insurance fraud immediately." I took a deep breath, steadying myself. My father tried to warn me about James years ago. I should have listened then. I'm listening now. Shannon nodded approvingly while Peter reached for his phone to set the machinery of justice in motion. The storm had broken. By morning, James's carefully constructed world would begin to crumble, and he would discover that the woman he had underestimated, the wife he had betrayed and possibly planned to eliminate, was now his most dangerous adversary. The morning after I fled my home, I sat in Peter Griffin's office, watching the systematic dismantling of James's life unfold with remarkable efficiency. My father's contingency plan, once activated, moved with the precision of a Swiss timepiece. By 9 a.m., the managing partners of Harrington and Blake had received comprehensive documentation of James's affair with Olivia Winters, including evidence that they had used firm resources and billing hours for their rendezvous. The ethics violations alone were serious enough to warrant an emergency partner meeting, but the potential damage to the firm's relationship with Westridge Capital elevated the situation to crisis level. Simultaneously, executives at Westridge Capital received notification that their legal representation might have been compromised by personal conflicts within Harrington and Blake. My father had been meticulous in his wording, no direct accusations, just enough information to raise serious concerns about James's professional judgment and discretion. "Your father understood corporate politics masterfully," Peter observed as reports of the fallout began filtering back to us. "He knew exactly which pressure points would create maximum impact." Meanwhile, Shannon Torres had arranged a meeting with Detective Sarah Mercer of the Financial Crimes Division to discuss the fraudulent insurance policy. James's forgery of my signature, his concealment of the policy's existence, and particularly the double indemnity clause for accidental death, created a compelling case for criminal investigation. "It's not a slam dunk for attempted murder planning," Shannon cautioned, "but the insurance fraud alone is a serious felony that could result in significant jail time." My phone, which I had briefly turned back on to check messages, exploded with notifications. 27 missed calls from James, 15 text messages ranging from concern to anger to desperate pleading. "Where are you? I came home and you weren't there. Rebecca, please call me. I'm worried. This is ridiculous. Whatever's wrong, we can talk about it. I'm calling hospitals. Is this some kind of game?" And finally, sent at 7:14 a.m. "I know you've talked to Olivia. Whatever she told you is a lie. Call me immediately." So he had figured out that Olivia had come to see me. I wondered briefly if she was safe at her sister's home, or if James had confronted her too. I was about to turn my phone off again when it rang, not James, but Riley, my assistant at work. "Rebecca, I'm so sorry to bother you, she began, her voice tense. I know you're taking personal time, but there's a situation here you should know about. A man from Harrington and Blake is in the lobby demanding to see you. He's causing quite a scene. James. At my workplace, the audacity was breathtaking. He says he's your husband, Riley continued, but security isn't letting him up since he's not on your approved visitor list. Should I tell them to send him away? I took a deep breath, weighing my options. Confronting James in a public place with security present might actually be safer than avoiding him entirely. And part of me I wasn't particularly proud of, wanted to see his face when he realized just how thoroughly his world was collapsing. Tell security I'll come down, I decided. But have them stay close and alert the head of security that this is a potentially volatile domestic situation. Peter looked alarmed. Rebecca, I strongly advise against meeting with James right now. At least wait until the protective order is in place. I appreciate your concern, I said, gathering my purse, but I need to do this. He's already causing a scene at my workplace, which could damage my professional reputation. Better to address it directly in a controlled environment with security present. Shannon reluctantly agreed. If you're determined to do this, keep it brief. Don't engage in detailed discussions about the evidence or legal proceedings. And if you feel threatened in any way, even subtly, withdraw immediately. 20 minutes later, I walked into the marble-floored lobby of the Elevate Tower, where our company occupied the top 5 floors. James stood near the security desk. His normally immaculate appearance noticeably disheveled, his suit wrinkled, his hair uncombed, dark circles under his eyes suggesting he hadn't slept. When he saw me, relief washed over his face, quickly replaced by a calculated composure. This transformation from genuine emotion to strategic presentation was so familiar, I wondered how I had ever missed its significance. Rebecca, thank God, he said, moving toward me. I've been worried sick. 2 security guards flanked me, creating a protective barrier that stopped James several feet away. His eyes narrowed at this arrangement, understanding immediately that I had anticipated his arrival and taken precautions. Can we talk privately? He asked, gesturing toward the seating area in the corner of the lobby. Here is fine, I replied, maintaining a professional tone despite the thundering of my heart. What do you need, James? His expression hardened slightly at my refusal, then softened again with practiced concern. What I need is to understand why my wife disappeared in the middle of the night without a word. Why you're not answering my calls. Why you apparently met with my colleague Veronica without telling me. Colleague, not mistress, not lover. The deliberate choice of words was so typical of James's careful framing. Is that really what you want to discuss? I asked quietly. Your colleague, Olivia? Not the insurance policy you took out on my life without my knowledge? Not the apartment you've been maintaining downtown? Not the research on spousal accidental deaths you've been collecting? The color drained from James's face so rapidly I thought he might faint. His mouth opened and closed without words, the practiced responses failing him for perhaps the first time in his life. I don't know what you're talking about, he finally managed. But the denial was weak, automatic rather than convincing. I think you do, I countered. Just as I think you know that the managing partners at your firm received some interesting documentation this morning, as did the executives at Westridge Capital. James's expression transformed again, shock giving way to calculation as he assessed this new information. Whatever you think you know, whatever you think you're doing, you need to stop, Rebecca. You're making a serious mistake that could damage both of us. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Both of us, not just him. Actually, my mistake was ignoring my father's warnings about you years ago, I replied, Surprising myself with my steady voice, he saw what I couldn't or wouldn't see. And he prepared for this day, James. He prepared very thoroughly. Understanding dawned in James's eyes, followed by a flash of something darker, Ranger, perhaps, or fear. "Harold," he murmured. "That interfering old man, even from the grave." "Yes, even from the grave," I agreed. "He left me well protected against exactly this situation." James glanced around the lobby, aware of the security guards watching our interaction and the curious glances from people passing through. When he spoke again, his voice was lower, more urgent. "We need to talk privately, Rebecca. There are explanations for everything you think you've discovered. The policy was for both of us. I have one on myself too, with you as beneficiary. The apartment is for out-of-town clients when hotels are booked. Olivia is manipulating you because she's unstable, obsessed with me after a brief professional mentorship." The lies flowed so smoothly, so convincingly, that for a moment I felt that familiar doubt creeping in, the doubt he had cultivated throughout our marriage whenever I questioned anything. But then I remembered the photographs, the text messages, the research on accidental deaths, and my resolve strengthened. "I've filed a police report about the insurance fraud," I said simply. "I've also initiated divorce proceedings and obtained an emergency protective order prohibiting you from contacting me or coming to my residence or workplace." James's facade cracked, his expression shifting from persuasive concern to cold fury. "You have no idea what you're doing," he hissed, stepping closer despite the security guards. "No idea who you're dealing with." "Actually, I think I finally do," I replied, holding my ground. "And James, the trust has been activated, all of it." For a moment, confusion flickered across his face. He didn't yet understand what trust I was referring to, but he recognized the confidence in my tone, the absence of the uncertainty he had always counted on to maintain control. "Whatever Harold left you, it won't be enough," he said dismissively. "You're making enemies you can't afford to have, Rebecca. People at my firm, at Westridge, they won't look kindly on being dragged into our personal issues." I smiled then, not unkindly, but with the quiet certainty of someone holding winning cards. "That's where you're wrong. My father didn't just leave me money. He left me leverage specifically. Leverage involving Westridge Capital's hotel properties, the ones my company now manages." James's expression froze as the implications registered. The professional consequences he had been so carefully trying to avoid by delaying his departure from our marriage were now unavoidable, triggered by his own actions. "Security will escort you out now," I said, nodding to the guards. "The protective order should be delivered to you formally within the hour. Don't contact me again, James. All communication should go through our respective attorneys." As the security guards moved to escort him toward the exit, James called over his shoulder. "This isn't over, Rebecca. Not by a long shot." But it was over. We both knew it. The careful plans he had been making, whether they included leaving me for Olivia or something more sinister, had crumbled entirely. The power dynamic had shifted irrevocably. I watched him walk away, this stranger I had once loved, and felt an unexpected wave of something like pity. For all his intelligence, his ambition, his careful calculation, James had fatally underestimated two people. My father, who had seen through him from the beginning, and Metha wife he had assumed would remain oblivious and compliant until he decided her fate. Back in Peter's office an hour later, reports continued flowing in about the professional fallout. James had been placed on administrative leave, pending an ethics investigation. Westridge Capital's general counsel had requested a complete audit of all work performed by Harrington and Blake, with specific emphasis on matters handled by James. Olivia Winters had reportedly resigned from Caldwell and Price, effective immediately. Her professional reputation tarnished by the revelation of her affair with a married partner from a competing firm. "The dominoes are falling exactly as your father anticipated," Peter observed, reviewing the updates. "Harrington and Blake will almost certainly sever ties with James once they've contained the damage to their relationship with Westridge. His career, at least in this city, is effectively over." "And the insurance investigation?" I asked, turning to Shannon. "Detective Mercer is moving quickly," she confirmed. "They've obtained warrants for James's financial records and will be searching the apartment today. The forgery alone is enough for criminal charges, but if they find evidence supporting a potential plan to harm you..." She didn't need to finish the sentence. We all understood the gravity of what that would mean. "What happens now?" I asked, suddenly exhausted by the morning's confrontation and its aftermath. "Now," Peter said kindly, "you begin rebuilding. The trust has been fully activated, providing you with financial independence. Your professional position remains secure, possibly even enhanced by the Westridge Capital connection, and most importantly, you're safe." Safety. Such a simple concept, yet one I had been lacking for longer than I realized. Physical safety, from whatever James might have been planning. Financial safety, thanks to my father's foresight. Emotional safety, to process the betrayal and deception without fear of consequences. "There's something else," Peter added, opening a drawer in his desk. "Your father left this for you, to be delivered when the trust activated." He handed me a sealed envelope, my name written in my father's distinctive handwriting. With trembling fingers, I broke the seal and unfolded a single sheet of paper. "My dearest Rebecca, if you're reading this, then the protections I put in place have been needed and activated. I'm sorry for that. Sorry that James proved to be exactly who I feared he was. Sorry that you've had to endure the pain of that revelation. But I'm not sorry for preparing. I've watched too many capable, brilliant women diminished by men who value control above love, possession above partnership. I refuse to let that happen to my daughter without a fight. You may feel lost right now, uncertain of the future you thought was secure. But remember this. The strength that will carry you forward didn't come from me or from my preparations. It was always within you, waiting for the moment when you would need it most. I believe in your resilience. I believe in your judgment, even when temporarily clouded by love. And I believe that the life waiting for you beyond this difficult passage will be richer, truer, and more authentically yours than anything you've known before. With infinite love and absolute faith in your strength, Dad." Tears blurred my vision as I finished reading, not tears of loss or fear, but of profound gratitude for this final gift from my father. Not just the financial protection or the strategic leverage, but his unwavering belief in me. Even when I had dismissed his concerns, even when I had chosen James over his warnings, he had never stopped believing that eventually I would find my way to the truth. And he had been there waiting, his hand reaching from beyond the grave to ensure I wouldn't face that truth alone or unprotected. As I carefully folded the letter and returned it to its envelope, I felt something shift inside. Me a weight lifting, yes, but also a strength settling into place. My father had been right. The capacity to face this crisis had always been within me. I had simply needed the catalyst to activate it, just as his trust had needed specific conditions to spring into action. "What are you thinking?" Peter asked gently after giving me a moment to compose myself. "I'm thinking that my father would be pleased with how this morning went," I said slowly, "and that for the first time in years, I'm making decisions based on truth rather than illusion." The truth was stark but liberating. My marriage had been built on deception. My husband had betrayed me in ways that went beyond infidelity, potentially extending to threats against my life. The future I had envisioned children, growing old together, Building a legacy had never been real. But from that harsh truth came unexpected freedom. Freedom to reimagine my life on my own terms. Freedom to reclaim my identity separate from James's influence and expectations. Freedom to recognize my own strength, which had been there all along, waiting for the moment when I would finally need to call upon it. In the weeks following the confrontation with James in my office lobby, events unfolded with a momentum that seemed to carry me along like a river after heavy rain. The protective order became permanent after James violated the temporary one by sending increasingly desperate emails and appearing at my hotel despite explicit prohibitions against contact. Each violation strengthened my legal position, while weakening his pattern that repeated across every aspect of our dissolution. "He's not handling this well," Shannon observed after a particularly vitriolic email from James was forwarded to her office. "Every aggressive action, every threat, every attempt to contact you, it's all being documented and added to both the divorce and criminal proceedings." This self-destructive pattern was so unlike the calculated, strategic James I had known that I sometimes wondered if I had ever really known him at all. The man who had methodically built his career, who navigated corporate politics with elegant precision, was now behaving like someone unraveling in real time. 3 major developments occurred almost simultaneously, approximately 1 month after I activated my father's trust. First, Harrington and Blake officially terminated James's partnership following their internal ethics investigation. The press release cited irreconcilable differences regarding firm values and professional conduct, but industry insiders understood the true meaning. James had become a liability they could no longer afford. Second, the district attorney's office filed formal charges against James for insurance fraud, forgery, and misappropriation of client funds. The latter stemming from discoveries during the investigation that he had been improperly billing Westridge Capital for hours spent with Olivia. The potential penalties included substantial fines and up to 7 years in prison. Third, and perhaps most unexpected, I received a call from Julian Westridge himself, the reclusive founder of Westridge Capital, and a figure so prominent in business circles that he rarely engaged directly with anyone below C-suite level. "Miss Hayes," his deep voice rumbled over the phone. I had reverted to my maiden name. "I hope you'll forgive the intrusion, but I felt a personal conversation was warranted given the circumstances." "Of course, Mr. Westridge," I replied, trying to mask my surprise. "I appreciate you taking the time." "I'll be direct," he continued. "The situation with your husband and my company's legal representation has created significant concerns. However, your handling of the matter specifically, your transparency and professionalism has been noted and appreciated." The conversation that followed was brief but consequential. Julian explained that Westridge Capital was reevaluating all of their professional relationships, including their hotel management contracts. However, based on my company's performance and my personal integrity during the crisis, they were inclined to not only maintain, but potentially expand our management role across their property portfolio. "We value partners who demonstrate character under pressure," Julian said before ending the call. "Your father was such a partner years ago when our companies first intersected. I see that same quality in you." The reference to my father caught me off guard. "You knew my father?" "Harold Reynolds. Certainly one of the most principled men I ever did business with. We served on the East Ridge Development Board together for nearly a decade." Julian's voice softened with genuine respect. "He spoke of you often, always with tremendous pride. Another connection I hadn't known about. Another thread in the protective tapestry my father had woven around me. How many such connections existed, I wondered. How many relationships had he cultivated, knowing they might someday provide support when I needed it most? After the call with Julian Westridge, I sat in my office overlooking the city, processing everything that had happened. James's professional reputation was in tatters, his legal troubles mounting, his carefully constructed facade crumbling to reveal the moral emptiness beneath. Meanwhile, my career was flourishing, my financial security assured by both the trust and my own professional advancement, my path forward increasingly clear. This reversal of fortunes wasn't just satisfying, it was instructive. For years, James had positioned himself as the more capable partner, the one whose career took priority, whose judgment should prevail in major decisions. I had accepted this framing, at least partly deferring to him on financial matters, adapting my ambitions to accommodate his, believing his assessment of my capabilities, rather than trusting my own perceptions. Now, facing the most significant crisis of my adult life, I was not only surviving but thriving. The strength my father had always seen in me, the resilience he had trusted would emerge when tested, was proving more than equal to the challenges before me. Even Olivia Winters, in her way, had demonstrated unexpected character. After her initial warning about the insurance policy, she had cooperated fully with both the divorce proceedings and the criminal investigation, providing crucial testimony about James's behavior and statements. One Friday afternoon, 2 months after activating the trust, I received an unexpected visitor at my office. Olivia Winters had called ahead, asking if I would be willing to meet briefly. Curious about what she might want now that the legal proceedings against James were well underway, I agreed. She looked different from the polished, confident woman who had appeared on my doorstep, more subdued, her makeup minimal, her designer clothes replaced by a simple blouse and slacks. The swagger was gone, but so was the fear that had been evident during our last encounter. "Thank you for seeing me," she said as she took the seat across from my desk. "I'm leaving Boston tomorrow, moving to Seattle for a fresh start." "I understand that impulse," I replied, thinking of my own desire to rebuild away from the shadows of the past. "Before I go, I wanted to apologize," Olivia said, meeting my eyes directly, not just for the affair, though of course for that too, but mostly for not seeing James clearly sooner, for not questioning why a supposedly unhappy husband wasn't taking steps to end his marriage, for being so focused on what I wanted that I ignored all the warning signs. Her candor surprised me. "What will you do in Seattle?" "I'm joining a small family law practice. Ironically, I'll be helping women navigate divorces and custody disputes." A ghost of a smile crossed her face. "Sometimes the best teachers are our own mistakes." I found myself nodding. "There's something to that." Olivia hesitated, then reached into her bag and pulled out a small wrapped package. "I found this in James's apartment. I think it belongs to you." I unwrapped the tissue paper to find a small silver picture frame containing a photograph of my father and me at my college graduation. I remembered it had gone missing from our home months ago. James had suggested it must have been accidentally knocked into the trash during cleaning. "Thank you," I said quietly, running my fingers over the frame. "This means a lot to me." "Detective Mercer said they finished processing the apartment as a crime scene," Olivia added. "There were other things there too: jewelry, documents, family heirlooms, things he took from you over time. They'll be returning them once the case is closed." The revelation struck me deeply. James hadn't just been planning to end my life. He had been gradually erasing it, pilfering small pieces of my history, my identity, my connection to my father. Each small theft too minor to confront, but collectively representing something far more insidious than mere kleptomania. After Olivia left, I sat for a long time, looking at the recovered photograph, thinking about how many small losses I had rationalized over the years. A missing earring, a misplaced letter, a family recipe that disappeared from my cookbook. Each time, James had a plausible explanation, and each time, I accepted it without question. That evening, I took myself to dinner at a small neighborhood bistro. I had always loved but rarely visited during my marriage because James found it too provincial. I sat at a table by the window, ordered a glass of wine, and opened the novel I had brought along, a simple pleasure that had once been routine but had somehow slipped away during my years with James. The waiter, an older gentleman with kind eyes, noticed me sitting alone with my book. "Would you like a candle for your table?" he asked. "The lighting's better for reading." "Yes, thank you," I replied, touched by the small consideration. As he lit the candle, its warm glow spreading across the table, he added quietly, "It takes courage to dine alone. Most people are afraid of their own company." The observation lingered with me as I savored my meal, turning pages between bites, occasionally glancing out the window at passers-by, hurrying through the autumn evening. There was something profoundly peaceful about this solitude, not loneliness, but a kind of reunification with myself. I had spent so many years accommodating James's preferences, anticipating his moods, adjusting my behavior to maintain harmony, that I had nearly forgotten how to simply be present with my own thoughts and desires. The woman who could get lost in a book for hours, who enjoyed people watching from cafe windows, who found satisfaction in small rituals of independence, as he had been there all along, waiting patiently to re-emerge. The candlelight flickered, casting dancing shadows across my table. Outside, leaves skittered along the sidewalk in the evening breeze. I felt a surge of gratitude for this ordinary moment of quiet joy, the kind of moment that requires nothing and no one else, that belongs entirely to oneself. This is what recovery looks like, I thought. Not dramatic declarations or grand gestures, but these small reclamations of pleasure and identity. One meal, one evening, one choice at a time. 3 months after the fateful anniversary dinner where I had glimpsed the text on James's phone, I stood in a downtown courtroom watching as he was led away in handcuffs. The trial had been mercifully brief. Faced with overwhelming evidence, including his own detailed research on accidental spousal deaths, James had accepted a plea deal on reduced charges of insurance fraud and forgery. 5 years. Shannon murmured beside me as the bailiff escorted James from the courtroom. "With good behavior, he'll likely serve 3. I nodded, feeling strangely hollow as I watched this final chapter of our shared story close. James had not looked at me once during the proceedings, his gaze fixed straight ahead as if refusing to acknowledge my presence might somehow preserve what remained of his dignity. "Are you okay?" Shannon asked as we gathered our belongings. "I'm not sure what I feel," I admitted. "Relief, certainly, but also a kind of grief, not for the marriage I lost, but for the one I thought I had." Outside the courthouse, reporters clustered on the steps, hungry for comments about the sensational case that had captivated business and legal circles for months. The story had everything: wealth, betrayal, possible murder plots, and the dramatic reversal of fortune that saw James Morganonce, a rising star in corporate law, now a convicted felon headed to prison. Shannon expertly guided me through a side exit, avoiding the media gauntlet. "Remember, you don't owe them your story. That belongs to you alone." My story. For so long I had lived within the narrative James constructed: successful lawyer and his supportive wife, power couple climbing in tandem toward an idealized future. Now, I was writing my own narrative, one page at a time. The divorce had been finalized the previous week, remarkably straightforward, given James's diminished leverage. With criminal charges pending and his professional reputation in ruins, he had little choice but to accept the terms my attorneys proposed. I retained all assets transferred through my father's trust, plus a considerable settlement reflecting James's attempted fraud and the duration of our marriage. Financial security was a tremendous gift, but the true transformation of those months went far deeper than monetary concerns. I had discovered capacities within myself, that years of subtle undermining had obscured. Resilience, clear judgment, decisive action when necessary. These qualities hadn't magically appeared during the crisis. They had been there all along, merely waiting for recognition and exercise. My professional life had flourished amid the personal tumult. The expanded relationship with Westridge Capital had elevated my position within Elevate Hotels, resulting in a promotion to Executive Vice President of Special Projects with oversight of their entire luxury property portfolio. The role came with challenges I would once have doubted my ability to handle, but now embraced as opportunities for growth. Your father would be proud, Peter told me over lunch the day after my promotion was announced. Not just of your professional success, but of how you've navigated this entire situation with grace and strength. I wish he could have seen it, I said, feeling the familiar pang of missing him. He did see it, Peter replied with quiet certainty. He saw your potential long before you recognized it yourself. That's why he created such elaborate protections, not because he thought you needed rescuing, but because he wanted to ensure you had time and space to discover your own capabilities. This perspective on my father's planning us scaffolding rather than rescue resonated deeply. He hadn't created the trust because he thought I was weak, but because he understood how gradually and insidiously my confidence had been eroded within my marriage. The financial and legal protections were simply tools to facilitate my rediscovery of strengths that had been systematically minimized. As summer turned to fall, I settled more comfortably into my new life. The condo in the Back Bay became truly home, filled with books I'd always wanted to read, artwork that spoke to me rather than impressed visitors, furniture chosen for comfort rather than status. I reconnected with friends who had gradually fallen away during my marriage, restored my relationship with my cousin Sarah, who had never trusted James, and even began cautiously dating again, not seeking replacement or distraction, but genuine connection based on mutual respect. Throughout this period of rebuilding, I carried a question that had lingered since the day Peter gave me my father's final letter. What had happened to my grandmother's sapphire ring? It was a family heirloom I had believed lost years ago when James had arranged to have it professionally cleaned, only to report that the jeweler had damaged it beyond repair. The answer arrived unexpectedly, one morning in October, 8 months after my anniversary dinner with James. Shannon called to let me know that the DA's office was releasing the last of the evidence from James's apartment, now that all legal proceedings were complete. There's a small safe they found hidden in the bedroom closet, she explained. They've just managed to get it open. Detective Mercer thinks you should come see what's inside. I met Shannon at the police evidence warehouse that afternoon. Detective Mercer, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s, who had handled the financial crimes case against James, greeted us with a firm handshake. "We found something interesting, Miss Hayes," she said, leading us to a table where the contents of the safe were displayed. "Quite a collection your ex-husband accumulated." Spread across the table were items I had assumed, lost, or destroyed over the years. My mother's pearl earrings, a vintage watch that had belonged to my grandfather, several pieces of jewelry James had given me for anniversaries and birthdays that had mysteriously disappeared after I wore them only once or twice. But the item that took my breath away sat in the center, my grandmother's sapphire ring, perfectly intact, nestled in its original velvet box. "He was keeping trophies," Detective Mercer explained gently. "We see this sometimes with certain personality types taking items of sentimental value from their victims, items that represent connections to family or the past." "Why?" I asked, carefully lifting the ring from its box. The deep blue stone caught the light, as brilliant as I remembered. "Control," Shannon suggested. "Erasing your connections to your family made you more dependent on him. Or perhaps he simply saw them as assets," Detective Mercer added. "These items are collectively worth quite a bit." We found documentation suggesting he was researching ways to sell some of the pieces through private dealers. I slipped the ring onto my finger, surprised to find it still fit perfectly. And he would have sold them after I was gone, I said quietly, using the money along with the insurance payout to start his new life with Olivia. Most likely, Detective Mercer agreed, though I doubt Miss Winters knew about this part of his plan. As I signed the paperwork to reclaim my belongings, Detective Mercer pulled me aside. We don't say this often in my line of work, but you're lucky, Miss Hayes. The evidence suggests your husband was methodically working towards something very specific. If you hadn't discovered what was happening when you did, she didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. I had help, I replied, thinking of my father's foresight, of Olivia's unexpected warning, of all the people who had stepped forward to support me when I finally opened my eyes to the truth. More than James ever anticipated. Later that afternoon, I drove to Mount Auburn Cemetery with the recovered sapphire ring on my finger and a small potted chrysanthemum for my father's grave. The October air was crisp, the cemetery ablaze with autumn colursa, beautiful contrast to the cold winter day when I had last visited after activating the trust. I placed the flowers by the headstone and sat on the bench across from my parents' graves, watching golden leaves drift down around me. After a moment, I twisted the ring on my finger and spoke aloud to the stillness. You were right, Dad. About everything. I should have listened sooner. The wind rustled through the maple trees, sending another shower of leaves spiraling to the ground. In that moment, I felt him with may know as a ghost or supernatural presence, but as the accumulated wisdom and love that outlives physical existence. I found the ring, I continued. Along with all the other things James took, I understand now what you were trying to tell me for so long. It wasn't just about him. It was about me, about remembering who I am, apart from anyone else's definition. I sat in silence for a while, letting memories of my father wash over me, teaching me to change a tire when I was 16, walking me down the aisle at my wedding with trepidation he tried to hide, holding my hand in the hospital during his final days. He had been preparing me all along. I realized not just with the trust and the legal protections, but with every lesson about self-reliance, every encouragement to maintain my identity, every gentle question about choices I was making. He had seen the pattern developing long before I could, had recognized the gradual erosion of my independence, and had done everything possible to ensure I would have a path back to myself if needed. As I was leaving the cemetery, my phone rang a Boston number I didn't recognize. Normally I would let unknown calls go to voicemail, but something prompted me to answer. Is this Rebecca Hayes? A man's voice asked. Yes. Who's calling? My name is Thomas Merritt. I'm an architect with Sustainable Designs. Julian Westridge suggested I contact you about the new Elevate property in Vermont. He mentioned you're looking for someone with experience in eco-luxury concepts. The call led to a coffee meeting the following week, which evolved into a professional collaboration as Elevate began work on a new boutique hotel in the Green Mountenza project Julian Westridge had specifically requested I oversee. Thomas was in his early 40s, with thoughtful gray eyes and an easy manner that put people instantly at ease. His architectural vision blended environmental consciousness with subtle luxury, creating spaces that felt both indulgent and responsible. We worked well together from the beginning, his creative approach complementing my practical management style. It took 3 months of weekly meetings before either of us acknowledged the spark between us, the lingering conversations after project discussions, the shared references that made us both laugh, the way our collaborative sessions flew by while meetings with others often dragged. Would you like to have dinner sometime? Thomas asked, after a particularly productive meeting. Not to discuss the project, just dinner. I hesitated, memories of James and all the destruction he had wrought flickering through my mind. Thomas seemed to sense my reservation. "It's just food," he said gently. "No pressure, no expectations. I'd just like to know more about Rebecca Hayes beyond the impressive professional I've been working with." What struck me most was how different this felt from my early interactions with James. Where James had been charming and intense, Thomas was straightforward and calm. Where James had pursued me with grand gestures and flattery, Thomas simply expressed interest in knowing me better. "I'd like that," I found myself saying. "But there are things about my past, about my ex-husband, that you should probably know before we go any further." Thomas nodded. "I've heard some of it through industry gossip. Whenever you're ready to tell me your version, I'm ready to listen." "But Rebecca?" His eyes met mine directly. "Your past doesn't define you. Not to me." A year after the text message that had changed everything, I sat alone in the small garden behind my condo, watching the first stars appear in the deepening twilight. The evening was warm for April, flowers beginning to bloom in the planters I had installed, their fragrance sweetening the air. I had come a long way in 12 months, from a woman whose life revolved around accommodating her husband's ambitions to someone firmly centered in her own purpose and power. The journey hadn't been easy. There had been nights of overwhelming doubt, days when grief hit unexpectedly, moments when the thought of rebuilding from scratch seemed impossible. But sitting in my garden as night fell, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Genuine contentment. Not the frantic happiness of trying to maintain a perfect facade, but a quiet, steady satisfaction with the authentic life I was creating. I thought about the woman I had been a year ago, preparing so carefully for that anniversary dinner, choosing the emerald dress James preferred, styling my hair the way he liked, practicing the attentive expressions that would make him feel valued and important. That woman seemed like a stranger, now someone I had once known intimately, but had gradually outgrown, like a childhood friend whose life had taken a different path. In the soft, spring darkness, I lifted my face to the emerging stars and whispered a silent thank you to my father for his protection, to Olivia for her unexpected warning, to all the people who had helped me reclaim my life, but mostly to myself, for finally being ready to see the truth, and for finding the courage to build something new from the ashes of illusion. The sapphire ring glinted on my right hand, catching the light from the patio lanterns, a tangible link to my past, but worn now as a symbol of reclamation rather than loss. I had considered selling it, using the money for a fresh start without reminders, but decided instead to keep it as a touchstone evidence that what appears destroyed can sometimes be recovered intact. As the night deepened around me, I felt a rare moment of perfect peace, the kind that comes not from achieving some external milestone, but from finally coming home to oneself. 18 months after activating my father's trust, I received a letter from the prison where James was serving his sentence. My first instinct was to throw it away unopened. What could he possibly have to say that I needed to hear? But curiosity won out, and with Shannon's reassurance that reading it couldn't harm me legally, I carefully slit the envelope. James's handwriting was as precise as ever, though the prison stationery gave it an incongruous setting. Rebecca. I've written this letter dozens of times in my mind over the past year, never quite finding the right words. Prison provides ample time for reflection, more than I ever wanted. I won't insult your intelligence by claiming remorse I don't fully feel, or by offering excuses for actions that have no justification. The truth is simpler and harder. I became someone I never intended to be, someone capable of betrayal, deception, and worse. The psychologist here suggests I display traits of narcissistic personality disorder. That's not an excuse, merely a framework for understanding how I could rationalize hurting someone who loved me, how I could plan something unforgivable and still see myself as the hero of my own story. I won't ask for forgiveness, I don't deserve it, and you've moved far beyond needing to offer it. I write only to acknowledge what I did and to tell you that you were never the problem. The flaws were mine alone. Harold was right about me from the beginning. I resented him for seeing through the facade I presented to the world, for recognizing the darkness I tried to hide even from myself. In the end, he protected you in ways I never could have anticipated. I've heard about your professional success, your new life. I'm not surprised. You were always more capable than I allowed you to believe. The limitation was never your potential, it was my need to diminish it, to maintain control. Don't respond to this letter. Don't visit. Don't give me any more of your energy or thought. You've already given me 10 years I didn't deserve. Live well, Rebecca. Not for me, not despite me, but for yourself alone. James. I read the letter twice, then carefully folded it and placed it back in its envelope. There was a time when words like these from James would have moved me deeply. Validation, finally, that I wasn't imagining his manipulation, that my father had been right, that my worth hadn't been the issue. But sitting in my home office, surrounded by evidence of the life I had rebuilt, I realized I no longer needed James's confirmation of what I already knew. His acknowledgement changed nothing about our past or my present. It was perhaps important for his own journey, but irrelevant to mine. I filed the letter in a folder marked Case Closed, and turned my attention to more pressing matters: the details of the Vermont hotel project, preparations for an upcoming board presentation, plans for dinner with Thomas that weekend. James's admission of guilt was the final piece of a puzzle I had already completed and moved beyond. The picture was clear now, requiring no further validation from the man who had once tried to destroy it and me entirely. 2 years after discovering my father's safety deposit box, I stood on the porch of a lakeside cabin in the Berkshires, watching the sun set over the water. The property had been another surprise from my father, a deed transferred to my name upon activation of the trust, a place he had purchased quietly years before but never mentioned. Peter had delivered the keys with a simple note: "For when you're ready for peace, Dad." The cabin was rustic but well-maintained, situated on several acres of woodland, with a private dock extending into the clear lake. It had taken me months to work up the courage to visit, unsure of what emotions might surface in this final gift from my father. Now, as the dying sun painted the water in shades of gold and crimson, I understood why he had secured this sanctuary. It wasn't just a property investment or a retreat. It was a statement of faith in my future, a belief that I would one day be ready for tranquility after weathering the storm he had foreseen. Thomas emerged from the cabin carrying 2 glasses of wine. "It's even more beautiful than you described," he said, handing me one. Our relationship had developed slowly, cautiously over the past year, both of us bringing histories and lessons learned to a connection built on mutual respect rather than infatuation or need. Where James had swept me off my feet with grand gestures and intensity, Thomas had simply walked beside me, matching his pace to mine, offering support without demanding dependency. "My father never even told me about this place," I said, looking out over the water. "He bought it 15 years ago, according to the deed." "That's around when you first met James, isn't it?" Thomas asked. I nodded, the timing suddenly significant. He must have had concerns from the very beginning. Or maybe he just wanted to make sure you always had a place that was entirely yours, regardless of what happened in your marriage, Thomas suggested. "Somewhere to remember who you are at your core." The insight struck me as profoundly true, like my father's voice speaking through Thomas's words. This wasn't just an escape hatch from a bad marriage. It was an affirmation of my independent identity, a reminder that I existed completely apart from any relationship. As darkness settled over the lake, fireflies began to appear among the trees, their tiny lights blinking on and off like earthbound stars. Thomas's hand found mine, his touch warm and steadying. "What are you thinking?" he asked. I considered the question carefully, aware of how different this moment was from similar ones with James. With James, such questions had been opportunities to perform the right response, to say what would please him or maintain the image of our perfect marriage. With Thomas, it was simply an invitation to share my authentic thoughts. "I'm thinking about cycles," I said finally. "How patterns repeat unless we consciously break them." My father saw something in James that reminded him of patterns he'd witnessed before. He tried to warn me, but I couldn't hear him then. And now I understand what he was trying to teach me, that love should never require diminishment. That partnership means growth, not constraint. I turned to face Thomas in the gathering darkness. That's the legacy my father really left me, no the trust or the legal protections or even this place, but the wisdom to recognize the difference between love and control. Thomas nodded, his eyes reflecting the last light on the water. "That's quite a gift." "It is," I agreed. "One I intend to honor by never forgetting it again." Later that night, as Thomas slept peacefully beside me, I stood by the bedroom window, looking out at the moonlight on the lake. The woman reflected in the glass was both familiar and new-marked by experience, strengthened by adversity, but essentially unchanged in her core self. I thought of all the women like me, caught in relationships that slowly eroded their sense of worth and agency. Women whose partners methodically dismantled their confidence while presenting a facade of devotion to the world. Women who might even now be noticing the first hairline fractures in the foundation of trust, questioning their own perceptions rather than the behavior causing their doubt. I hoped they would find their moment of clarity sooner than I had. I hoped they would have someone like my father in their corner, believing in their strength even when they couldn't access it. I hoped they would discover, as I had, that the capacity for rebuilding exists within each of us dormant, perhaps during the years of accommodation and compromise, but never truly extinguished. The moonlight traced a silver path across the dark water, leading from the shore into the distance, an invitation to journey forward rather than looking back. I touched the sapphire ring on my right hand, feeling its solid presence like a talisman of continuity amid change. "Thank you, Dad," I whispered to the night, "for everything." And somewhere in the depth of my heart, I felt his answer. "You're welcome, my darling girl. But remember, you saved yourself." 3 years after the text message that had altered the course of my life, I stood behind a podium at the Women's Business Leadership Conference in Chicago. The ballroom was filled with professional women of all ages, though I noticed many silver-haired heads. In the audience, women who had navigated decades of corporate politics and personal challenges to reach positions of influence. "Financial independence isn't just about money," I said, concluding my presentation on protecting personal assets in professional partnerships. "It's about maintaining your decision-making power. It's about ensuring that your choices remain truly yours." The response was immediate nodding heads, knowing glances exchanged between friends, a few women discreetly wiping away tears. I had touched a nerve that resonated beyond business strategy into the realm of hard-won personal wisdom. During the Q&A session that followed, a woman in her 70s stood, elegant in a tailored navy suit that spoke of decades of professional success. "Miss Hayes, thank you for your candor," she began. "Many of us have experienced versions of what you've described, perhaps not as dramatic, but similar patterns of control disguised as protection or love. What would you say was the most important lesson you learned from your experience?" I considered the question carefully, aware of the weight it carried in a room full of women who had likely navigated their own difficult relationships and professional challenges. "Trust your instincts," I finally replied. "We're conditioned to doubt ourselves, to second-guess our perceptions, especially when someone we love tells us we're overreacting or being too sensitive. But that inner voice, the one that whispers, "Something isn't right here," is usually trying to protect you. The biggest mistake I made wasn't marrying the wrong man. It was ignoring my own intuition for years while he systematically undermined it. A murmur of recognition rippled through the audience. "And one more thing," I added. "If you're fortunate enough to have people in your life who express concern about your relationship, listen to them. They can often see patterns that love has blinded you to. My father tried to warn me for years. I dismissed him as overprotective and paid a heavy price for that dismissal. The wisdom of those who truly care for you is a gift, even when it's difficult to hear." After the session ended, a line of women formed to speak with me individually. Some shared their own stories of financial manipulation in marriages or business partnerships. Others asked specific questions about protective legal structures. A few simply wanted to express gratitude for the validation of experiences they had never fully articulated, even to themselves. One silver-haired woman grasped my hands in hers, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "43 years I was married to a man who made me doubt my own mind," she said quietly. "After he died, I found bank accounts I never knew about, a child from an affair he'd hidden, property in another state. I thought I was alone in missing what was right in front of me." "You weren't alone," I assured her. "And neither was I. The most sophisticated manipulation doesn't look like control, it looks like love, protection, or partnership. That's what makes it so effective and so devastating." She nodded, squeezing my hands. "They say wisdom comes with age, but I think it comes with survival. You're wise beyond your years, my dear." As I gathered my materials at the end of the day, the conference organizer approached with a warm smile. "That was powerful, Rebecca. We've had record attendance requests for your session recording." She hesitated briefly. "There's something else." Julian Westridge was in the audience. "He's asked if you'd join him for dinner this evening." I was surprised. Although Westridge Capital had continued to expand its partnership with Elevate Hotels, my direct interactions with Julian had been limited to quarterly review meetings and occasional business functions. A private dinner invitation was unexpected. "Of course," I replied, curiosity piqued. "Did he say what he wanted to discuss?" "Only that it was personal rather than business," she said, handing me a card with the restaurant details, "and that it concerned your father." The restaurant Julian had chosen was an old-school Chicago steakhouse, the kind where dark wood paneling and leather booths created private enclaves for discreet conversations. When I arrived, the maitre escorted me immediately to a corner table where Julian Westridge was already seated. At 72, Julian remained an imposing figure, tall and broad-shouldered, with a full head of white hair and the confident bearing of a man accustomed to influence. He stood as I approached, greeting me with a firm handshake. "Rebecca, thank you for joining me on such short notice. Your presentation today was exceptional, particularly given the personal nature of the material." "Thank you," I replied as we took our seats. "I've found that speaking openly about my experience helps others recognize patterns in their own lives. But I admit I'm curious about why you wanted to meet." "The organizer mentioned it concerned my father." Julian nodded, his expression growing more serious. "It does. I've been meaning to have this conversation with you for some time, but wanted to wait until the legal matters with your ex-husband were fully resolved." He paused as the waiter approached to take our drink orders. "Once we were alone again," Julian continued, "your father and I met in 1985 at a real estate development conference in Boston. We were both young men then, just beginning to build our companies. Harold had a vision for construction that went beyond profit margins, believed in creating structures that served communities that would stand the test of time both physically and socially. I smiled at this characterization, so aligned with my own memories. That sounds like Dad. He used to take me to his building sites as a child and show me how the foundations were laid. Everything depends on what you can't see, Becca, he'd tell me. The work that gets covered up is what holds it all together when storms come. Julian's eyes crinkled at the corners. Precisely. That philosophy extended to how he conducted business as well. We worked together on several projects over the years, and I never knew him to cut corners or compromise his principles, even when it cost him financially. The waiter returned with our drinks and took our dinner orders. When he departed again, Julian's tone became more personal. What you may not know is that Harold and I remained close friends, even after our professional paths diverged. We spoke regularly. We vacationed together occasionally. I was one of the few people who knew about his diagnosis before he shared it with you. This revelation surprised me. My father had always maintained clear boundaries between his personal and professional lives. The idea that Julian Westridge had been a close friend rather than merely a business associate shifted my understanding of both men. He never mentioned that, I said, though in retrospect there were calls he would take in private, conversations that seemed to energize him even as his health declined. Julian nodded. Your father was a private man in many ways, but he spoke of you constantly, your intelligence, your compassion, your potential, and his concerns about your marriage. I felt a familiar tightness in my chest. He saw problems long before I was willing to acknowledge them. He did, Julian confirmed. About 3 years before his death, Harold came to me with a proposition. He had been observing your husband's career trajectory and had connected some concerning dots. James Morgan was positioning himself to handle legal matters for Westridge Capital, leveraging mutual connections to gain access to our business. I didn't know that, I said, surprised again. Harold suspected James's interest in my company wasn't coincidental. He believed James had identified Westridge Capital as a stepping stone for his ambitions long before he met you, possibly even before he orchestrated your chance meeting at that charity auction. A chill ran through me at the implication. Are you saying James pursued me because of my father's connection to you? Julian's expression was compassionate, but direct. Harold discovered that James had attended a private equity conference 6 months before you met, where your father and I were both keynote speakers. James approached Harold afterward, expressed admiration for his work, asked pointed questions about his business relationships. When he happened to meet you at the charity event, he already knew exactly who you were and who your father was connected to. The revelation landed like a physical blow. I had always believed our meeting was serendipitous. James outbidding everyone for a weekend sailing package I'd helped organize, then immediately asking if I'd join him. The perfect meet-cute story we told at dinner parties for years. I had no idea, I whispered, mind racing to recategorize memories I had long cherished as genuine. Harold didn't want to tell you this while you were happy, Julian continued gently. But as he observed James's behavior over the years, he became increasingly concerned that your marriage was part of a longer-term strategy that involved gaining access to both Hayes Construction's assets and, eventually, Westridge Capital's legal business. I took a long sip of my wine, trying to process this new layer of deception. So when Dad created the trust, he was protecting you not just from a potentially difficult divorce, but from what he suspected was a calculated long game. When James began pursuing partnership at Harrington and Blake, and specifically angling for the Westridge account, Harold's concerns deepened. Did my father ask you to be part of his contingency plan? I asked, suddenly understanding Julian's immediate support after my marriage imploded. Julian nodded. He did. Though I hope you understand it wasn't only for Harold's sake that I agreed. Your father showed me evidence of James's pattern of manipulation that was disturbing. I have daughters of my own. I would hope someone would do the same for them if needed. The waiter arrived with our meals, creating a brief pause in the intense conversation. When we were alone again, I asked the question that had been forming since Julian began his explanation. Why tell me this now? The divorce is final. James is in prison. It's all in the past. Julian set down his fork, his expression solemn. Because there's one more piece of your father's protection plan that hasn't yet been activated. He left instructions that I should tell you about it only when I believed you were truly ready, when you had not only survived James's betrayal, but had reclaimed your full strength. Your speech today convinced me that time has come, he continued. The wisdom you shared, the clarity with which you articulated lessons that take many women a lifetime to learn, Harold would have been immensely proud. From his jacket pocket, Julian withdrew an envelope and placed it on the table between us. Your father left this with me 3 weeks before he died. Inside is information about an account he established at Westridge Private Banking and Entity, separate from the main capital investment firm, one that handles exclusive wealth management for a select clientele. I looked at the envelope, my name written in my father's familiar handwriting. Another trust? Not exactly, Julian replied. Harold called it his wisdom fund. Unlike the contingency trust that activated upon evidence of James's infidelity, this account was designed to activate on my assessment of your readiness to use it effectively. I don't understand, I said, hesitant to open the envelope. Julian smiled gently. Open it, Rebecca. Your father explains it better than I could. With slightly trembling fingers, I broke the seal and unfolded the single sheet inside. My dearest Rebecca, if you're reading this, then Julian has determined you've not only weathered the storm I feared would come, but have emerged from it with the wisdom that can only be earned through difficulty transcended. The contingency trust I established was for your protection to ensure you would have the resources and time needed to rebuild if James proved to be who I feared he was. But this fund has a different purpose entirely. This is not money for safety or security. This is capital for creation and contribution. I've established an account at Westridge Private Banking with $10 million specifically dedicated to your discretionary use in supporting other women facing challenges similar to what you've experienced, whether through legal aid, educational initiatives, housing assistance, or other programs you deem valuable. These funds are for you to extend to others the same protection and opportunity for renewal that I tried to provide for you. The money comes with no strings, no requirements, no oversight beyond your own conscience and judgment. Julian's only role was to determine when you were ready to use this resource wisely. A time when such a responsibility would feel not like a burden, but like a natural extension of the wisdom you've earned. You have always had a generous heart, Rebecca. Now, paired with the clarity that comes from having navigated deception and emerged stronger, I believe you'll know exactly how to use these resources to create ripples of positive change. This is my final gift to you, not just the means to help others, but my absolute trust in your discernment about how to do so most effectively. With endless love and pride, Dad. Tears blurred my vision as I finished reading. The restaurant around us faded into a background hum as I absorbed the magnitude of what my father had created, not just protection for me, but through me. The potential for protection extended to countless other women. He knew, I said softly, looking up at Julian. Somehow, he knew that helping others would be part of my healing. Julian nodded. Harold understood something fundamental about recovery from betrayal, that the final stage of healing often involves transforming personal pain into purpose. He wanted to ensure you had the resources to act when that understanding arrived. Why you? I asked. Why entrust this decision to you rather than Peter or another advisor? I asked him the same question, Julian admitted. He said it was because I had no professional obligation to you that might cloud my judgment. Peter was your attorney, bound to act in your legal interests. Harold wanted someone who could assess your readiness from a more objective perspective, someone who understood both business and human nature. I carefully refolded the letter, mind already racing with possibilities. The foundation I had been quietly researching. The legal aid network for women trapped in financially abusive relationships. The education initiative for older women re-entering the workforce after divorce or widowhood. There's no rush to decide how to allocate the funds, Julian said, correctly reading my expression. The account has been managed conservatively and has actually grown to nearly 12 million since Harold established it. Thank you, I said, meeting his gaze directly. Not just for this, but for honoring my father's wishes so carefully. For being the friend he needed when he was facing both his illness and his concerns about my marriage. Julian's eyes softened. Harold Hayes was one of the finest men I've ever known. Helping his daughter was the easiest promise I've ever kept. As we finished our meal, the conversation shifted to lighter topics: Julian's grandchildren, my work with Elevate Hotels, Thomas's architectural innovations for the Vermont project. But beneath the pleasant exchange ran a current of something profound, a sense of completion, of another piece falling into place in the puzzle of protection my father had so carefully designed. Late that night in my hotel room, I sat at the window overlooking Chicago's glittering skyline, my father's letter open in my lap. The city stretched below me, millions of lights representing countless lives, each with their own stories of love and loss, triumph and betrayal. Somewhere in that tapestry of humanity were women facing what I had faced, the gradual erosion of self-confidence, the mounting evidence of betrayal, the terrifying prospect of starting over after years or decades of investing in a relationship built on lies. I thought about the silver-haired woman from the conference, discovering her husband's deception only after his death had removed any possibility of confrontation or resolution. I thought about Olivia, whose ambition had blinded her to James's manipulation until she stumbled upon evidence too disturbing to ignore. I thought about my younger self, dismissing my father's concerns as overprotective, unable to see the patterns that were visible to more objective eyes. The common thread wasn't foolishness or weakness, it was trust. Trust exploited by those skilled at presenting false fronts, at leveraging love as a shield for deception. Outside my window, a plane's lights moved slowly across the night sky, a reminder of journeys undertaken and distances crossed. My own journey from betrayal to rebuilding had covered tremendous emotional territory, each step revealing new layers of understanding about both James's deception and my own resilience. Now my father had offered me a new path, not just recovery or self-protection, but the opportunity to transform personal pain into broader purpose, to extend the safety net he had created for me to others who might not have had a Harold Hayes in their lives, carefully constructing contingency plans against future storms. I closed my eyes, feeling a profound sense of connection to my father, despite the years since his passing. He had seen not only the danger I was in, but also the strength I would eventually reclaim, the wisdom that would emerge from the wreckage of illusion. "I hear you, Dad," I whispered to the empty room. "I understand now." Upon returning to Boston, I wasted no time beginning the groundwork for what would eventually become the Hayes Wisdom Foundation. With Thomas's encouragement and Peter Griffin's legal guidance, I established a structure that would allow for both immediate direct assistance to women in crisis and longer-term educational and advocacy initiatives. "Your father would be pleased with how you're approaching this," Peter observed as we finalized the foundation's charter. "Methodical, strategic, focused on sustainable impact, rather than quick visibility." "I learned from the best," I replied, thinking of how carefully my father had constructed his own protective measures, the years of documentation, the strategic leveraging of business connections, the patience to wait for the right moment. rather than acting prematurely. The Foundation's first initiative focused on emergency financial assistance for women leaving abusive relationships, funds for temporary housing, legal representation, and immediate necessities that could make the difference between staying in danger and establishing safety. Working with domestic violence organizations across Massachusetts, we created protocols for rapid response when traditional aid systems moved too slowly. Our second program, launched 6 months later, provided specialized financial literacy education for women over 50 who were navigating late-life divorce or widowhood after years of financial dependence. The curriculum covered basics like budgeting and investing, but also addressed the psychological aspects of financial independence, rebuilding confidence, recognizing manipulation, establishing boundaries. I taught several of these workshops myself, drawing on my own experience to connect with women who often felt ashamed of their financial naivete or angry at themselves for trusting partners who had betrayed that trust. The most dangerous phrase in financial abuse is, "Don't worry, I'll take care of it," I told one group of women, ranging in age from their 50s to their 80s. It sounds like love, like protection. But financial knowledge isn't a burden your partner should shield you from, its power they should want you to share. The nodding heads and murmured agreement told me the message resonated. These women didn't need to be told they had made mistakes. They needed tools to reclaim agency over their remaining years and the validation that their experiences weren't unique or the result of personal failings. 4 years after discovering James's betrayal, I found myself facing an unexpected challenge. The Vermont hotel project, the collaboration that had brought Thomas into my life, was nearing completion, and Elevate's executive team was considering who should oversee its launch and first year of operations. "You're the obvious choice, Rebecca," my CEO said during our planning meeting. "You've shepherded this project from concept to reality. You understand the vision better than anyone." "I'm flattered," I replied carefully, "but it would mean relocating to Vermont for at least 12 months. My life is here in Boston, the Foundation, my support network, my home." What I didn't say, what felt too vulnerable to articulate in a corporate setting, was that the prospect of uprooting myself triggered echoes of old anxieties. James had always been the one suggesting relocations, career shifts, life changes, always with seemingly logical reasons that nevertheless prioritized his needs and ambitions over mine. The idea of leaving Boston, even temporarily, stirred uncomfortable memories of accommodations I had made at the expense of my own stability. Though I recognized intellectually that this situation was entirely different, a professional opportunity based on merit rather than a manipulative pressure emotionally, it touched old wounds. Later that evening, I shared these concerns with Thomas over dinner at the lakeside cabin that had become our weekend retreat. "I know it's irrational," I said, looking out at the water. "This is a career opportunity I've earned. It has nothing to do with James or the past. But something about making such a significant change still triggers old fears." Thomas listened without interrupting, his expression thoughtful. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment before responding. "It's not irrational at all," he said finally. "Our bodies remember trauma even when our minds have processed it. That hesitation isn't weakness, it's your internal warning system doing exactly what it should, flagging a situation that bears some resemblance to past danger." His validation loosened something tight in my chest. "So what do I do with that warning? Ignore it because the circumstances are different?" "No," Thomas replied. "You acknowledge it, thank it for trying to protect you, and then look clearly at how this situation differs from the past. You make your decision based on those differences, not despite your concerns." He reached across the table, his hand warm over mine. "And Rebecca, whatever you decide, it won't be like before. I'm not James. I don't need you to diminish yourself to accommodate my ego. If Vermont makes sense professionally, we'll figure it out. If staying in Boston feels right, that's what you should do. The contrast between this conversation and similar ones with James was stark. Where James would have subtly pressured, Thomas simply supported. Where James would have made me feel selfish for prioritizing my needs, Thomas treated them as inherently valid. Where James would have presented false choices that inevitably led to his preferred outcome, Thomas genuinely left the decision in my hands. "Thank you," I said quietly, "for seeing the difference between irrational fear and legitimate caution. That's what real partnership looks like," he replied simply, supporting each other's discernment rather than overriding it. In the end, I accepted the Vermont assignment with modifications that addressed my concerns of phased relocation, that allowed me to maintain my Boston connections, technology investments that enabled remote oversight of the Foundation's operations, and a clear timeline for my return after the hotel's first anniversary. Thomas adjusted his client schedule to spend at least 10 days each month in Vermont, using the opportunity to explore potential projects in the region. The arrangement wasn't perfect, but it was a balanced compromise that respected both our professional needs and our relationship. The Evergreen Lodge opened in October to considerable acclaim within the hospitality industry. Its innovative design blending luxury with environmental consciousness, Thomas's architectural vision realized through my operational expertise, quickly established it as a destination for travelers seeking responsible indulgence. I found unexpected joy in the day-to-day challenges of launching a new property, in building a team culture from scratch rather than inheriting existing systems, in seeing guests experience spaces we had spent years conceptualizing. The creative satisfaction was different, from but complementary, to the purpose-driven work of the Foundation. 6 months into the Vermont assignment, I received news that James was being released early from prison for good behavior. The notification came through Shannon Torres, who had maintained periodic contact to keep me informed of any legal developments related to my ex-husband. "He'll have served just under 3 years of his 5-year sentence," Shannon explained during our phone call. The parole board cited his exemplary conduct and participation in rehabilitation programs. "Do I need to be concerned?" I asked, surprised by how calm I felt receiving this information. "His parole conditions include no contact with you, directly or indirectly," Shannon assured me. "He'll be required to remain in Massachusetts, but must stay at least 50 miles from Boston. He's also prohibited from working in financial services or law due to his felony conviction." "So, he's no longer a threat," I said, more statement than question. "Correct. James Morgan's ability to harm you financially, professionally, or physically has been permanently constrained. But I wanted you to know about the release in advance, so you wouldn't be caught off guard if you heard it through other channels." After ending the call, I walked down to the lake behind the hotel, finding a quiet spot on the shore where I could process this unexpected development. The water rippled gently in the spring breeze, sunlight dancing across its surface in ever-changing patterns. 4 years ago, news of James's early release would have sent me into a spiral of anxiety and fear. Today, it registered as information to be noted but not a threat requiring response. The distance wasn't just geographic, it was emotional, psychological, existential. The man who had once occupied the center of my life had become a peripheral figure, relevant to my history but not my present or future. I picked up a smooth stone from the shore and skipped it across the water, watching it bounce 3 times before disappearing beneath the surface. The ripples spread outward, intersecting with other patterns on the lake before gradually fading away. Like James's influence in my life, I thought. Once all-encompassing, now reduced to occasional ripples of memory that no longer disrupted my peace. That evening, I called Sarah, my cousin who had never liked James and had gradually been excluded from my life during our marriage. another relationship I had rebuilt in the years since our divorce. James is being released next month, I told her, after we caught up on family news. I thought you might hear rumors and wanted you to know I'm fine with it. Sarah's protective instinct flared immediately. Are you sure you're safe? Do you need to extend the restraining order? I'm actually in Vermont, I reminded her, and the parole conditions include no contact. But more than that, I'm just not afraid anymore, Sarah. He doesn't have power over me, emotional, financial, or otherwise. That's the best revenge, Sarah said after a moment. Not just surviving but thriving so completely that he becomes irrelevant. It's not even about revenge anymore, I realized as I said it. That implies he still matters enough to warrant the energy revenge requires. This is something beyond that a reclamation. So complete that the person who once caused such harm barely registers as significant. After we hung up, I found myself thinking about the various stages of healing I had moved through since that text message appeared on James's phone during our anniversary dinner. The initial shock and disbelief, the tactical self-protection, the grief for what I had thought was real, the anger at both James and myself, the gradual rebuilding of confidence, and finally, this genuine indifference that felt like the ultimate freedom. I had expected to feel something more dramatic when James was released. Fear, perhaps, or vindictive satisfaction at how thoroughly his life had been dismantled. Instead, I felt a quiet acknowledgement that we were simply two people whose paths had crossed destructively, but were now permanently diverged. There was wisdom in that emotional neutrality, a sign of healing more profound than any intellectual understanding could provide. The opposite of love isn't hate, it's indifference. And I had finally, completely arrived at that healing shore. 5 years to the day after I discovered my father's safety deposit box. I stood in the restored ballroom of the Hayes Wisdom Center, a century-old mansion in Boston's Back Bay, that the foundation had purchased and renovated as its headquarters. The space hummed with conversation as women of all ages gathered for the center's official opening. The foundation had evolved beyond my initial vision, expanding to include not just crisis intervention and education, but also research into financial abuse patterns, advocacy for legislative protections, and mentorship programs connecting younger women with those who had navigated similar challenges and emerged stronger. You've created something extraordinary here, Julian Westridge said, joining me near the windows overlooking the garden. Now in his mid-70s, he moved more slowly but maintained the sharp intelligence and direct manner I had come to appreciate. My father created it, I corrected gently. I'm just building on his foundation literally and figuratively. Julian shook his head. Harold provided resources and protection, yes, but this he gestured to the room filled with women sharing experiences and strategies. This transformation of pain into purpose is entirely your creation, Rebecca. Don't diminish your role in it. Before I could respond, Peter Griffin approached with a warm smile. The mayor's representative has arrived. She'd like to present the city proclamation, recognizing the center's contribution to women's economic security. The brief ceremony that followed the proclamation, the ribbon cutting, the applause felt surreal, so far removed from the frightened woman who had fled her home in the middle of the night 5 years earlier. If someone had described this future to me then, I wouldn't have believed such transformation possible. As the formal program concluded and guests began touring the center's various spaces, I noticed an unexpected visitor standing quietly at the back of the room, Olivia Winters. She looked different from when I had last seen her, more settled, her style less flashy but still elegant, her expression containing a confidence that seemed earned rather than performed. I made my way through the crowd to greet her, genuinely pleased by her presence. Olivia, This is a surprise. A good one, I hope, she replied with a small smile. I'm in Boston for a conference and saw the announcement about the center's opening. I hope it's okay that I came. More than okay, I assured her. Would you like a tour? As we walked through the center, the legal consultation rooms, the financial education classroom, the resource library, the small apartments for women in immediate transition, Olivia listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions about the programs and services. You've created something remarkable, she said as we finished in the garden behind the building. Something that will help countless women avoid what we both experienced with James, though in very different ways. What happened with Seattle? I asked, curious about her life in the years since she had left Boston. It was good for a fresh start, she replied. I built a practice focused on helping women navigate high-conflict divorces, putting my experience to constructive use. I married last year, a pediatrician who's refreshingly straightforward after. She trailed off with a small gesture that encompassed our shared history with James. I understand completely, I said, thinking of Thomas's transparent nature after years of James's manipulation. Olivia hesitated, then added quietly, I've never properly thanked you, Rebecca. For what? I asked, genuinely puzzled. For not hating me. For recognizing that I was caught in James's web, too, just differently. For seeing me as more than the other woman, even when you had every right to reduce me to that role. I considered her words carefully. Hatred would have kept me tethered to James just as surely as blind love did. And reducing you to a stereotype would have perpetuated the same kind of thinking that allowed him to reduce both of us to objects in his personal narrative. There's something else, Olivia said, her expression growing more serious. Something I learned recently that I thought you should know. We sat on a bench beneath a flowering magnolia tree, the garden around us quiet compared to the activity inside the center. I was back in Boston last month for a deposition and ran into Carson Matthews. She was a junior associate at Harrington and Blake when James was a partner there. He mentioned something disturbing. Olivia paused, seeming to consider her words carefully. What was it? I prompted. Apparently, before James met you, he was briefly involved with another woman with family connections to Westridge Capital Julian's niece, Alexandra. She ended the relationship abruptly after about 6 months. Carson said there were rumors that Julian himself had intervened after discovering something concerning about James's financial activities. The revelation landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples through my understanding of events. Julian never mentioned this. I don't think many people knew, Olivia continued. Carson only heard about it because he was assigned to work with Alexandra on a case years later, and she made a passing comment about having dodged a bullet with James Morgan. So I wasn't the first, I said quietly, pieces falling into place. James had already attempted to gain access to Westridge through a family connection and failed. Then he identified my father's relationship with Julian as another potential entry point. Olivia nodded. When I heard this, I thought about how calculated it all was, how far back his planning might have extended. I thought you deserved to know. Thank you for telling me, I said, mind racing with implications. Had Julian recognized James's name when my father expressed concerns? Had he seen the pattern repeating, but chosen not to share the full history? I should get back to the conference, Olivia said, standing. But I wanted to see what you've built here. It's inspiring, truly. After she left, I remained in the garden, processing this new information. If James had already attempted to infiltrate the Westridge circle through Alexandra, it explained Julian's immediate responsiveness when my father approached him with concerns. Julian hadn't just been helping his friend's daughter. He had recognized a predatory pattern he'd seen before. Rather than diminishing my father's protection, this knowledge somehow enhanced I've had identified the danger independently, had taken action based on his own observations rather than relying on Julian's prior experience. Two men, seeing the same wolf approaching from different vantage points, had both moved to secure the perimeter. That evening, after the opening festivities concluded, I called Julian from my office at the center. "The event was a tremendous success," he said when he answered. "You should be proud." "I am," I replied, "and grateful for your support in making it possible. But there's something I need to ask you, Julian. Something I learned today." A brief silence followed. Then, with characteristic directness, "Alexandra." "Yes," I confirmed. "You knew James before he met me. You knew he had already attempted to access Westridge through your niece." Another pause, longer this time. "I did, and I should have told you, particularly after everything that happened." "Why didn't you?" I asked, not accusatory but genuinely curious about his reasoning. "Two reasons," Julian replied. "First, I wanted to honor Harold's approach. He had chosen not to burden you with the full extent of his suspicions until necessary, and I followed his lead. Second, more selfishly perhaps, I was ashamed that I hadn't warned Harold more explicitly when I first recognized James's name in connection with you." "You could have prevented my marriage," I observed. "Perhaps," Julian conceded. "Or perhaps I would have only succeeded in pushing you more firmly toward him." Harold and I discussed this at length. He believed that direct opposition would likely backfire, that you needed to discover the truth in your own time, with safeguards in place for when that happened. I considered this, remembering how defensive I had been of James whenever my father expressed concerns. He was probably right. I wasn't ready to see it then. "Wisdom often arrives precisely when we're prepared to receive it, not a moment sooner," Julian said. "Your father understood that. He created protection without demanding immediate recognition of its necessity." After ending the call, I walked through the quiet center, now empty of visitors, but filled with potential, each room designed to facilitate different aspects of women's journey from vulnerability to strength. My father had done the same for me. I realized creating spaces where I could safely navigate my own transition when the time came. The trust, the legal documentation, the strategic professional connections, the lakeside cabin, the wisdom fund, each representing a different facet of protection or recovery. And now, through the foundation, I was extending that same multi-layered approach to others. Financial assistance for immediate crises, legal support for navigating complex separations, educational resources for building independence, community connection to combat isolation, advocacy to address systemic issues. As I turned out lights and prepared to leave, I paused in the main hall where a simple plaque acknowledged the center's origins. The Hayes Wisdom Center, established in memory of Harold Hayes, who understood that true protection empowers rather than constrains. That distinction between protection that diminishes and protection that liberates had become the philosophical cornerstone of everything the foundation stood for. It was the difference between James's controlling behavior, disguised as care, and my father's genuine support that respected my autonomy even when I couldn't see danger ahead. One sought to own, the other sought to empower. One demanded dependency, the other fostered independence. One was about possession, the other about love. 7 years after the text message that had changed everything, I stood on the deck of the lakeside cabin watching a summer sunset paint the water in shades of amber and gold. The quiet evening was occasionally punctuated by laughter from inside, where Thomas was teaching my 7-year-old niece to play chess while my cousin Sarah prepared dinner. The simple domesticity of the scene contrasted sharply with the carefully curated perfection I had once maintained in my life with James. That existence had been a performance, every dinner party precisely orchestrated, every outward interaction measured for its impression on others. This life, by comparison, was authentically imperfect, messy, at times, spontaneous, grounded in genuine connection rather than appearance. I touched the sapphire ring that still adorned my right hand, thinking of the journey it represented, lost, recovered, reclaimed as a symbol of resilience rather than loss. Like the ring, I too had been temporarily separated from my true nature during my years with James, only to be restored more vibrantly on the other side of that difficult passage. Thomas joined me on the deck, handing me a glass of wine before leaning against the railing beside me. "Sarah says dinner's almost ready. Apparently we're having experimental lasagna because she forgot half the ingredients." I laughed. "Should we be worried?" "Terrified," he replied with a grin. "But Emily is too excited about setting the table to care what we're actually eating." We stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the last light fade from the sky as stars began to appear above the lake. "Happy?" Thomas asked simply. I considered the question not as the performance it would have once been with James, but as the genuine check-in Thomas intended it to be. "Content?" I replied thoughtfully. "Which I've come to value more than happiness. Happiness comes and goes with circumstances. Contentment has deeper roots." Thomas nodded, understanding the distinction. Roots that have been tested by storms tend to grow stronger. "They do," I agreed, "but they also need good soil to begin with." I was fortunate to have that foundation of father who planted values of self-worth and integrity that survived even when temporarily overshadowed. Inside, Emily called that she had finished setting the table, her excited voice carrying through the open windows. Sarah's laughter followed, warm and familiar. "We should go in," Thomas said, but neither of us moved immediately, lingering in the peaceful moment as darkness settled fully over the lake. I thought about the many women I had met through the foundation over the past few years, some just beginning their journey away from manipulation or abuse, others decades beyond it but still healing in various ways. Each had her own version of darkness to navigate, her own path toward reclaiming wisdom and worth. What united them, what united all of us, who had loved unwisely but learned profoundly, was not the specific harm endured, but the universal capacity for renewal. The human spirit's remarkable ability to extract meaning from suffering, to transform betrayal into insight, to rebuild not just despite trauma, but because of the strength discovered through surviving it. "What are you thinking about?" Thomas asked, noticing my contemplative expression. "The difference between intelligence and wisdom," I replied. "Intelligence knows that some people can't be trusted. Wisdom knows which ones and why, and builds protection accordingly." "And love?" he asked, his hand finding mine in the gathering darkness. "Love sees clearly," I said after a moment's reflection. "It doesn't need illusions or performance to survive. It thrives in truth, even when that truth includes imperfection." The dinner bell rang, Sarah's playful way of calling us inside. Thomas squeezed my hand gently before releasing it, a silent acknowledgement of the moment we'd shared. As we turned to go inside, I took one last look at the starlit Lakea view my father had secured for me, long before I understood I would need its peace. His final gift hadn't been the money or the property, or even the strategic protection against James. It had been faith and wavering belief in my capacity to eventually see clearly, choose wisely, and rebuild stronger. That faith had been the true foundation beneath everything else, the quiet certainty that wisdom, once truly earned, could never be taken away. The greatest gift my father left wasn't protection from harm, but faith in my ability to transform it into wisdom. That's the inheritance I'm determined to pass, on not just safety in crisis, but the unshakable belief that women can emerge from betrayal not just intact, but illuminated. Rebecca Hayes, founder, Hayes Wisdom Center. The end.